listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
It really is, you know, the mother of all talk shows. Just watched by up to 1 million people every week. A truly global open university of the airwaves, where you don't get charged any tuition fees and you're positively encouraged to speak back to the teacher. What's that noise? It's the sound of the flapping of white coats at the top of the Labour Party, where the deputy leader just said this weekend that she was prepared to suspend thousands and thousands, a third thousand, of her own members in the ongoing rumpus over the booting out of the party's former leader, Jeremy Corbyn. That would, of course, be quite against the Labour Party's rules and constitution. And I've got news for you, Angela. It's also against the law. But hey, what do I care? The Labour Party is in meltdown, and we'll be talking, of course, about that. And the main burden of my remarks will be the assassination of Mohsen Farizadeh, the Iranian nuclear scientist who was cruelly murdered by a brave team of 62 killers to kill one man on the streets just outside Tehran. It's the death of one man. It's a cloud no bigger than one man's hand. But is it a harbinger of a very great storm to come? I think so. So might you by the end of this show. Fasten your seatbelts. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway.
This is Radio Sputnik.
And this, of course, is London, but coming to you all over the world, thanks to the wonders of the internet and SputnikNews.com. We are in crystal clarity on FM in the Washington, D.C. area. Donald Trump is pulling up his chair by the fire to listen to us right now on 105.5 FM. We are on AM right across the United States from Burning City to Burning City, and all around the world on the aforementioned SputnikNews.com. But 500,000 of you again last week watched as well as listened to the show. And if you are one of those, here is a public service announcement. If you're watching this on Facebook, either my own Facebook page or RT's multiple Facebook pages, please share right now with all of your friends, all of your contacts on Facebook. You can also watch on YouTube, either my own YouTube channel. Do subscribe if you visit it. I'm just a shade, I think, under 100,000 members on there, or on RT's multiple YouTube channels. You can also watch on Twitter and on Instagram and also on Twitch, which I used to joke about, but I now know that some of my best friends are Twitchers, if you get my drift. Let me get the Labour Party business out of the way. I no longer care about what happens in the Labour Party. I'm not even involved in the Israel-Palestine issue anymore. I'm not involved in any Palestinian campaign of any kind. I wasted too much of my life on that. And I don't have all that much life left. But the idea that the deputy leader of the Labour Party, on the International Day in solidarity with the Palestinian people, should declare to an audience overwhelmingly composed of supporters of Israel on International Palestine Day and get cheered to the rafters for threatening to suspend thousands and thousands and thousands of Labour Party members shows just how far this has all gone. For some that are not quite the sharpest knives in the box, like Angela Rayner, this has all just grown out of control for her. For those much smarter who know that this was all a political weapon to use to destroy the leadership of Jeremy Corbyn and the possibility of a Labour government of a new type, well, this is all going to plan so far as they are concerned. And if, it's a big if, Jeremy Corbyn is readmitted as a Labour MP, it will only be on the terms of the most humiliating abasement, which, were he to perform, would utterly destroy his legacy, such as it is, utterly destroy his reputation, in which case, job done either way. The chief whip of the Labour Party made that very, very clear in a letter to Mr. Corbyn this week, which we all read, of course, in the newspapers before Mr. Corbyn heard it pop through his letterbox. So I don't care. I've got no dog in this fight. But the Labour Party is headed, I can promise you, in the same direction as PASOK in Greece, in the same direction as the so-called Socialist Party of François Hollande in France. It is headed for the scrap heap. It is otiose. It is historically redundant. And me, having spent 36 years in it, I never expected to be so happy about that. But I'm not at all happy, of course, about the main subject of my remarks this evening. There is no doubt that the Israeli Secret Service, Mossad, was responsible for Dr. Fakhrizade's cruel murder 48 hours ago on Friday in the boulevard leading from his home into Iran, where he taught at the Imam Hussein University, nuclear physics, a respected nuclear physicist. He was murdered by 62 people, which you might think is a lot of people to murder one man. It's not exactly a small team, but it was a team that carried out the operation flawlessly, every single one of them apparently melting away and affecting their escape. It is therefore a major embarrassment, humiliation actually, for the governing powers in Tehran, who not only could not protect their leading nuclear scientists, against whom multiple threats had been made, including by the Israeli Premier Netanyahu just a couple of years ago. And with the mounting tension over the US intentions towards Iran in the last weeks at the fag end of the Donald Trump presidency, one would have thought that everyone who might be a target would be on the highest possible alert and, if possible, not following a regular weekly schedule of driving from a home to a workplace on a Friday. But the failure to apprehend, which seems to be the case, any of the 12-man murder squad or any of the 50 backup team is equally embarrassing, equally humiliating. Why do I dwell on that? Not because I want to embarrass Iran in these circumstances, still less to humiliate them, but to make the case that I'm about to make, that Iran has absolutely no course of action open to it other than condign retaliation. And that retaliation, one must assume this was all a sting, all a trap, is bound to bring forth further retaliation to the retaliation, and vice versa, and vice versa, and vice versa. And very soon we may very well be in the middle of a terrible war in the Gulf. Very soon we may very well see the United States enter this picture from the deck of the Nimitz, its powerful aircraft carrier. If you want to know where the next war is going to be, it said, follow the aircraft carriers. Well, the Nimitz is now in the Gulf. And I personally have no doubt at all that Iran is going to retaliate in a very serious way. They did retaliate for the murder of General Soleimani, but they did so in a very limited way, and some reason exists to believe they did so in a coordinated way through a third party, obviously, with the United States, which was able to move assets and men from the very places that Iran would then later that evening hit. And they confined their retaliation to Iraq, which is the safest place for them to retaliate, and also the closest to them. But this time, it may very well be much more serious and much more distant than that. Israel was already on a state of quite high alert at the possible speculation, possible US attack on Iran more than a week ago. I spoke about it on RT America, I think with Rick Sanchez or with Manila Chan. I think with Rick. You can look it up. The possibility of an American attack to set Iran ablaze, to scupper any chance that the incoming Biden administration might be able to mend bridges with Iran, re-enter the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal architecture, to basically rain on Biden's parade, forcing him to inherit a terrible new conflict, or at least a conflict in a terribly new phase. Israel had already moved on to alert, and therefore one can assume that Israel is tonight bracing itself for Iranian retaliation. Israel would retaliate to the retaliation, and then the United States doubtless becomes involved. And then we have a very serious war, because Iran has already promised that if the United States attacks Iran, then Iran will retaliate not just against the United States, but against any and all of the United States allies in the region. And the closest of those is, of course, Saudi Arabia. And that brings me to my next point. We've got a poll running. Who killed the Iranian scientist, Dr. Fakhrizadeh? Who killed him? A, Israel, B, the US, or C, both? I might have added a third question, or a third option, because it is no accident that just over a week ago, a private jet bearing Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu left Tel Aviv and landed in Saudi Arabia. I'm not making that up. It is denied, of course, by the Saudis, But it is not denied by the Israelis. And I have long ago learned that you're more likely to get the truth from Israel than you are from Saudi Arabia. So I believe that Netanyahu flew to Saudi Arabia. I believe that he met there with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, bin Salman, MBS. I believe that he met bin Salman alongside Mike Pompeo, Donald Trump's outgoing Secretary of State. And the three of them stirring that pot, that witch's brew, were undoubtedly, amongst other things, discussing the murder most foul that took place in Tehran on Friday. A final green light for what I'm sure was a long-planned potential operation was given at that secret meeting in Saudi Arabia, at a meeting of Pompeo, Mohammed bin Salman, and Benjamin Netanyahu. Words you never thought you would ever hear. But you heard them, and they are sincerely believed by me. And therefore, Iranian retaliation will, in the first instance, hit Saudi Arabia, close the Straits of Hormuz, both actions causing a fantastic interruption to the supply of oil to the world and to production such as it is in Western economies. Iran has already promised to obliterate, eviscerate, remove from the map the city of Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. They already promised this, and they can do it just like that. So if you are one of those that bought an apartment in Dubai from a seller on the street off the page that might or might not have ever been built, be afraid, be very afraid. The Gulf countries that recently restored, or rather instituted for the first time, relations with Israel, as well as the US fleet, as well as the Nimitz, as well as all of the Western naval assets in the Gulf, including in Bahrain, another of the new friends of Mr. Netanyahu, where both the British and the American fleet are stationed, are all in the firing line. And of course, were these Iranian threats to be made good, then the United States involvement will have to become still more serious, and so on and so on. Meaning that Donald Trump would leave office in January with a world at war, with a Gulf in flames, with a dramatic interruption to world oil supply and prices around the world for all kinds of things, just in the middle of a coronavirus pandemic. Now, it is possible that none of this will happen. The only circumstances in which I could see none of this happening would be if Joe Biden is on the telephone to the Ayatollahs right now, promising that in January the US will rejoin the JCPOA and will remove the crippling, murderous sanctions that Trump has imposed on Iran over the last 4 years. But I'm not confident that Joe Biden is capable, even if he was willing, to do that. And so my best estimate is that 2020 just got a whole lot worse, and there are still several weeks to go. Much more coming up. Julian Assange, Harry Dunn, coronavirus, much more coming up over the next 3 hours and 40 minutes. Do stay tuned. This is the mother of all talk shows.
Barnier said in his latest statement, despite the difficulties we face, an agreement is within reach, if both sides are willing to work constructively, if they are willing to cooperate.
Sacre bleu! 60 billion in les toilettes is the Maginot Line all over again. What shall we do?
We have got to get the Englanders of Treasure Island back on track and get them overpaying for our cars again.
My union friends, what shall we do? We are running out of options.
There is only one thing we can do, mon ami. What we do best.
Warning, warning. European Union reversing. Warning, warning.
George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
Well, no sooner had I spoken, but news breaks of a huge explosion in Sanandaj in Iran near the airport. Picture of a big explosion taking place now on Twitter. Breaking news. Well, who killed the Iranian scientist Dr. Fakhrizadeh? A, Israel. B, the US. C, both. You can vote on my Twitter feed right now. I'm joined by the finest independent news and political analyst in the United States, the super cool Mr. Garland Nixon. Garland, welcome back on the mother of all talk shows. Again, we meet in potentially somber circumstances. Tell us, first of all, what you can about possible American involvement in this murder that took place on Friday.
Well, at this point, we're not hearing the U.S. actually claim that they were involved. But I think it's fairly obvious that the discussion between Mike Pompeo, the Saudis, and the Israelis here a few days back, precipitated these actions. It certainly appears that there is almost a desperation by the Israeli hawks and the hawks in America to try to get this, to get some kind of a war started, to get an attack on Iran started before Joe Biden gets in. The thing that I think is interesting about this, though, is that we are not hearing Joe Biden, make a lot of noise about it, that the Biden people are not, standing up saying, wait a minute, we're about to come in. Don't do this. They are, conspicuously quiet.
Yes, Bernie Sanders condemned it in the most fierce way, but there's been nothing from Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, or any of those slated to fill the top positions in the Biden administration. Why would that be?
I certainly would. I mean, the most reasonable interpretation would be that can be seen as a head nod, that they're not opposing it, because clearly if they were, opposing this, if they were against it, they'd stand up and make a lot of noise, because this could leave, as you discussed, you could leave the world in flames in the middle of a pandemic. The oil supply gets interrupted, and we go from a severe recession in many parts of the world to an absolute depression. And that potential is certainly there. And we're on the brink of it right here in the United States without any Middle Eastern war. So their lack of a response is, in fact, a response. I think that international security analysts are looking at the Biden camp. Surely people are saying, what do you have to say? And not hearing anything is hearing anything. It is, a head nod in the direction of whatever the war hawks want to do in Iran.
Before we come on to the party political issues, tell us about the economy right now in the U.S. in the midst of a pandemic which has taken more Americans than even the most pessimistic of analysts was predicting back in February, March.
Well, we're looking at a very desperate situation here. As a matter of fact, within 1 to 2 days after Christmas, approximately 12 million Americans will lose all of their benefits. So we're going to have, again, tens of millions of people who will be facing evictions. And we've had some freezes on the evictions, many up until like January 1st. Again, the end of December, early January. However, you have to keep in mind that even with our eviction, the eviction freezes that we've had, they're just suspensions of payments. So we've had people who haven't had to pay their rent since March or April. However, when these eviction freezes end, they're going to owe all the way back to the beginning of the pandemic and plus going forward, which clearly people are not going to be able to pay. So we're looking at a very desperate situation here. One of the things that's interesting is we've been seeing more pictures of these lines, of the food lines in America. You know, the ones they always tell us you don't want a socialist country because you're going to get food lines. Well, we don't have a socialist country. We have food lines and no shortage of them. And one day we see news that says the Dow hits 30,000. The next day, I see, 3,000 people in a food line, and I'm thinking, well, they certainly aren't there to celebrate the Dow hitting 30,000. So we're in a bad situation. It's going to get worse. And it looks like the Biden administration, they're coming into a calamitous situation potentially with Iran, and apparently they want it to be far worse because we're going to be looking at what looks to be a depression. Also, I'll add this. The Republicans, who will probably control the Senate, are basically saying, we have to start worrying about the deficit. We're spending too much. Now, that's after they've given $4 to $5 trillion to the richest people on earth in a tax cut, another $5 to $7 trillion in the CARES Act. So after they've given $10-12 trillion to the richest people on earth, they've suddenly decided now that the everyday American is about to get thrown out onto the street. Now we need to cut back.
Now, you make the point that the Republicans will probably control the Senate. It is only speculation, that, isn't it? Because there are 2 runoffs, 2 Senate elections. And very soon, in the state of Georgia, which was once solid Republican, but now is moving quite steadily into the Democratic Party column. What can you tell us about that crucial by-election day?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things depends on the state interestingly enough, the state of the Republican Party. Donald Trump is really angry. He has actually lashed out against officials in Georgia. He says he is sorry that he endorsed Governor Kemp, the governor of Georgia. So the question is whether or not the, disruption in the Republican Party, whether or not, the anger over what's happened there will cause problems with their turnout, whether their people will be angry enough to show up. I suspect it's such if I had to bet based on history, I would argue that the Republicans will probably hold Georgia. However, again, with Donald Trump going after the Georgia leaders, angry at the governor, et cetera, the AG, there's no telling. It could turn in the direction of the Democrats. There's a case to be made, and many people are arguing here that the Democratic leadership and Wall Street don't want the Senate. Because if they have both houses and the Senate, people are going to expect them to do more for the people. They won't have a foil. They won't have excuse. Right now, they'll have an excuse. Joe Biden's a very conservative, neoliberal person. He does not want to do any significant bailouts or deals for the average working class people. If the Democrats get the Senate, he's going to have a much more difficult time making the argument for conservative, fiscal policy.
That's a new one to me, and of course entirely logical, as you say. Finally, what about Donald Trump? He is like a bear with a sore head. You've got this Sydney woman who is cut loose from the legal team, roaming around, blaming Venezuela and Korea and China and Iran for rigging the election, making hair-raising claims, but we never actually see any evidence. And in the courts, these cases are being cut down. Almost every day I read of a new one. Is there any chance that Donald Trump can reverse the result of the election in your view?
Not at this point. A couple of things. Number one, as you stated, he would have to translate those allegations of fraud, et cetera, into admissible evidence for the courts. And even then, he'd have to show enough fraud. One state that he lost by 40,000 votes, he'd have to show 40,001 instances of fraud to overturn the election. The interesting thing about Donald Trump in his claims against of fraud are this. You know, Donald Trump always mixes bizarre assertions with some things that have a lot of truth to them. The fact of the matter is this. As a person, I was a Bernie supporter in 2016, and we argued then, in the states where machines were used, wherever there was a paper trail, the states where there was a paper trail, Bernie Sanders versus Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders won those states 51-29. In the states with machines where there was no paper trail, Hillary Clinton won in a blowout, 65-35. So a lot of people here have been arguing for years. What Donald Trump is saying, that these machines are not reliable, is accurate and should be looked into. The problem is, when Donald Trump won in 2016, he had the authority to do that. He didn't do it. He sat on it for 4 years. And now, if Donald Trump's willing to move forward and say, hey, I'm going to work for these voting machines to be looked into, I'm all for that. But if Donald Trump's just saying, I don't want to fix the issue with voting machines that can be hacked or changed, I just want to win here in November. Well, I'm not down with that. I'm down with a guy who's in it for the cause of the good of the order. If he's just trying to win here a couple weeks ago, well, that doesn't serve anyone, and it won't even serve him, because he'll never be able to show it in time to win anything.
Dr. Jill Stein, my friend, and the candidate I supported last time, she won a celebrated legal case that these machines have to be open to inspection of the software in them, because she too suspected that these machines were well dodgy. Do you know about that?
You know, I'm not familiar with that, but there's a documentary people can find out there called Hacking Democracy that was back, I think, as early as 2002, 3, 4, 5, somewhere back in there. There's been, I mean, just there's unlimited information online on the internet. John Hopkins did a study where they easily hacked these machines. So these machines have proprietary software. It's not open source software. We can't see what's going on inside of those machines, and we're supposed to trust that the system is honest, even though we don't have the opportunity to inspect it. And I've always believed this: you get what you inspect, not what you expect. So do we have a democracy here? I find it hard to believe that we actually have honest and democratic outcomes when, in fact, we can't look at the software for the machines, and everyone knows, it is universally acknowledged that they're easily hacked. And we're just supposed to believe that the intelligence communities or other nefarious actors wouldn't hack them, even though they could. That's a tall order for me for most reasonable people to accept. Yeah, you and me both. Especially, look, as I put it to someone the other day about democratic political machines, Tammany Hall is famous for a reason. The Democratic Party, in its smoke-filled rooms and its political gangsterism, has 100 years of history in this. And as you alluded earlier, Bernie Sanders, their own man, was cheated at least once, maybe twice, of the nomination. So we're talking about a party that would cheat their own people, never mind cheat the electorate as a whole. Absolutely. I mean, when it comes to the Democratic Party, as you probably know, I'm an independent and I don't like either one of these parties. But the fact of the matter is the Democratic Party has a long history of going back to Tammany Hall, and especially in recent years. They cheated Bernie in 2016, cheated him in 2020. And then I got to add this. You know, I think what Donald Trump should pursue in the long run, and he hopefully with lawsuits, et cetera, I think he should start going after some of these media outlets, because the fact of the matter is you cannot cannot deny that the censoring online, the censoring of the Hunter Biden laptop story, the discrediting of what was a very valid story, as close as this election was, it's hard to argue that the actions by the big tech industries, the actions by the media in general, did not have an effect enough to shave something that close. So I think, I hope Donald Trump, as much as I disagree with him ideologically, I do hope through lawsuits, et cetera, he starts going after some of these media outlets, going after some of these big tech firms, and through discovery is able to get emails and further information. Because in my opinion, I mean, though it's not, it may not be technically government intervention, but it's corporate intervention. And in some instances, it's probably government intervention by proxy, because I guarantee if you start looking into these big tech firms, particularly Washington Post, New York Times, you will find emails and you will find conversations between members of the intelligence community and some of these people that were doing the censorship. And that, my friend, I think should be illegal. That is, in fact, election interference.
Yeah, especially as Mr. Schmidt is now a Cypriot. The head of Google has now obtained a Cypriot citizenship. That's an American patriot for you.
Yeah, well, and that's the bottom line. That's why people are using the term, globalist and neoliberal, et cetera, because these people don't care about countries. They don't have a country. It's about power. It's about how much power they can get, and they only know one word: more. If you've got a crumb left, then they're going to fight you to get that crumb and leave you to start.
Garland Nixon, as always, a pleasure to tour the horizon with your good self. Thanks for joining us on the
Thank
mother
you.
of all talk shows. Who killed the Iranian scientist? A, Israel, 42%. B, the US, 5%. C, both, 53%. Lots of votes in. You can get yours in on my Twitter feed. Let's take a call first before we go to our next guest. It's Gerard in Kilwinning. Gerard, welcome.
Hi, George. How you doing, man? Listen, great segment at the start of the show. You summed it up for me perfectly. As far as who killed Dr. Fakhrizadeh, they're all in it. This is a mafia-style conspiracy, in my opinion. And what happened to this man? It was a mafia-style killing, something like The Sopranos or The Godfather. Yeah. And this what really, to use a Scottish expression, this scunners me, the hypocrisy of our governments. For years, all I've heard about is how we're trying to expert human rights and bringing law and order to the Middle East. And
a rules-based order.
I know. But here's thousands of dollars worth of weaponry for Saudi Arabia and Israel to kill children in Gaza and Yemen. But heaven forbid the Syrians do. But by the way, as you all know, Syria is never actually proven they gassed anybody. But when they do something, it's a terrible thing. But when our allies do it, no problem. I'm just sick of the hypocrisy of our governments, George. And I've got a theory. I think this all goes back to Iraq. I laughed at everyone complaining about how Donald Trump blatantly lied the last few years. Tony Blair, and you were in the House of Commons, he sat in the House of Commons and said Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, which could be launched within 45 minutes. A blatant, bold-faced lie. And ever since then, I think people have just had no faith in Western democracy anymore. I certainly haven't anyway.
No, I think you're right. That a lot of the crises, even over things like the coronavirus, can be traced back to the collapse of state credibility, government credibility, the credibility of the political class, of the media class, collapsed over the issue of Iraq. It wasn't immediately apparent to everybody, but the reverberations have continued, and nearly 20 years later, we see a total collapse in believability of those that are telling us what to do or telling us what to believe. Even if they're telling the truth, nobody believes them.
That's the problem. I mean, now people, as you talk about the virus, you talk about anything, there's just no faith in democracy anymore. Just on the Iran situation, I can quite believe that we are going to be going in some kind of conflict with Iran. Do you think Donald Trump is actually playing the long game? You talk about oil prices, you talk about just everything in that situation. If he starts a war with Iran, leaves such a mess for Biden to fix, he's thinking 4 years' time, I could be the guy to be the sort of white knight saviour. I wouldn't put it past anything. I wouldn't put anything past Trump. Maybe that's what he's thinking.
You need to lose a few pounds, Gerard. Otherwise, he's not going to see 2024, or maybe even 4:30. He's a walking heart attack waiting to happen. But if he gets that shirt off, gets on the back of a horse like Putin, and gets himself in shape, who knows? You might be right. Gerard, thank you very much indeed for the call. 1 minute break. Count it.
Let's get ready to rumble!
It has filled our hospitals. It has killed 400 doctors, nurses, and care home professionals. Friends of mine have died of it. So what exactly are you on here telling me? That it's not infectious?
I'm not sure.
Tell us what you think. Don't be coy, Roy.
Well, I'm going to quote Doctor, and he said that the pandemic was over a long time ago in a video, an unlocked video, and it's going around right now. You know, you can watch it for yourself.
You guys are always doing your research on the internet. Look.
Okay.
Yeah, see, you have got a point of view. You are being coy, Roy. You come on here playing the daft laddie. I just saw something on the government's website. Something I can choose between Ben in Hull on YouTube, or I can trust the doctors and the medical authorities. I can trust them, or I can go with wee Ben.
I mean, I'm not.
Wee Ben on YouTube.
Am on the Gov website.
Well, what are you saying?
These are statistics.
Tell us then. Look, you started out by saying COVID was not an infectious disease. Are you really saying that? Are you really saying that, Ben? Ben, stop being silly. Are you really saying that the coronavirus 19 is not infectious? Ben, are you really saying that?
I'm repeating what has been stated on the government website.
But I already explained to you that it was otherwise thus classified. It is a public health emergency. Aren't you aware of it? Don't you know the cost we paid of it? Don't you know how many people have died? How many people are sick? How many doctors and nurses are dead now in the cold earth, fighting something that you're on the radio telling me doesn't exist? I have no longer any patience for this kind of juvenile nonsense.
Radio Sputnik.
The mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway. The world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Well, I should say to you that the Iranian government are denying knowledge of the incident I referred to earlier, although on social media there are multiple postings of photographs which purport at least to be from that explosion. Multiple reports of a large explosion in the capital of the Iranian Kurdish region, Sanandaj. There's a picture purporting to be an explosion beside the airport. Images show a large orange fireball in the night sky. Now, this is according to the ASB news agency, which, it says, covers breaking military news in the Middle East, Russia, and the USA. It's added that there is a gas refinery nearby, but whether that's connected to the explosion is not known yet. No word on injuries at this time. The explosion is thought to have happened, if it happened, around 7 o'clock UK time, just as we were coming on the air. We'll keep you, of course, updated. There are also other reports of significant events, violent events in Iran, but until we can confirm them, I don't really want to recklessly opine about them. Not least because my next guest is waiting. I've said this many times. but if I was ever in trouble, I'd hire Rad Saiger, especially as he's been working all this time for the parents of Harry Dunn as a volunteer. He just happened to live in the same village as the couple, Harry Dunn's mother and stepfather. When they were in their hour of need, Rad stepped up, and what a job he's done. It's taken him to the High Court, it's taken him to the White House, it's taken him into every television studio in the land, as he has sought justice for the parents of Harry Dunn, who was cruelly killed by Anne Sakulis, an American intelligence agent, nominally in Britain, on an RAF base, or nominally an RAF base, as the spouse of a much junior diplomat. And if you believe that, I could sell you that tower behind me at a knockdown price. She drove up the road on the wrong side of the road. She killed poor Harry, a young boy, a teenager, shy of his 18th birthday. And then she slipped out of the country, falsely claiming, in the view of Harry's parents, that she had diplomatic immunity. Now, the family have fought this campaign now for a year. We've brought the story in front of you many times. They were in the High Court this week, and it was a setback. Let's hear from Rad just how big a setback it was. Rad, tell the viewers and listeners what happened in the courts this week, please.
George, good evening, and thank you once again for having me on. It really means the world to the parents to have this platform.
Thank you.
So thank you. Yeah, as you say, the parents have been in the High Court in London these last couple of weeks, arguing their case that Anne Sakulis did not have diplomatic immunity. And unfortunately, and as you describe it, a setback, this particular court was against us on that argument this week and found in favor of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office and decided that Anne Sakulis did have diplomatic immunity. But almost immediately, on strong legal advice, the parents have appealed that judgment. And on we go up to the next level, which is the Court of Appeal, and the parents will go to the highest court in the land, the Supreme Court, if necessary.
Now, some people will be confused at this. The court found for the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, but the British government now says that it agrees with you. Otherwise, why would they have posted or asked Interpol to post a police notice for the arrest of this woman? How can she both be arrestable and diplomatically immune from prosecution?
It's a perfectly valid point, George. It is a terribly confusing picture. I was clear right at the outset that Anne Sakulis did not have diplomatic immunity, backed by a number of lawyers who the parents hired who felt the same, and the senior prosecutor in this country, the director of public prosecutions, completely independent of us, decided that Anne Sakulis did not have diplomatic immunity. And that's why he went on to charge her in December. And then, as you say, importantly, circulated an Interpol red notice for this lady. You and I both know that those are not steps that you can take against somebody who has a valid claim for diplomatic immunity. The dispute arises around secret legal agreements that were entered into in the 90s when CIA and NSA agents were posted to this very small base about two miles behind me. And the governments at the time did their best to try and give protection to these people. And that is the nature of the dispute. It focuses on these secret legal agreements. But the foreign secretary continues to stay on an island on his own with the support of this court, arguing that those agreements did give Anne Sakulis diplomatic immunity. But we carry on our fight up to the senior courts in London.
But she was here as a spouse, and the person to whom she was married did not have diplomatic immunity. So how could she have it?
George, you couldn't script it. And this is why we are all, I think millions of people around the world know this family. We're all scratching our heads wondering what the hell is going on here. And as you say, her husband, Anne Sekulis's husband, Jonathan, was declared when he arrived as a member of the U.S. State Department or personnel. But those agreements that I just referred to pre-waived his immunity. So before he arrived, his immunity, his diplomatic immunity, was pre-waived. So unbelievably, George, had he killed Harry as somebody who was working here, he would have been prosecuted and, if convicted, gone to jail. This is what the parents do not understand. This is what we're arguing. How can you have a situation where the CIA officer, the person who has immunity, or doesn't have immunity, have a situation where his dependent, his wife, has a separate bubble of immunity that is somehow greater than hers? So that is absolutely absurd in practice and in law, we say, and we're very confident that the senior courts in London will overturn that. It is just ludicrous to even be in this situation that we're in of having to fight this legal battle. You've just articulated it perfectly. It's impossible to comprehend.
How certain are we that Harry was killed by the person who did have diplomatic immunity and not, in fact, by the person who didn't have diplomatic immunity?
George, it's a perfectly good question. And look, don't forget who we are. We are just a humble set of people from South Northamptonshire in rural England. The parents, 15, 16 months on after losing Harry, still do not really know the circumstances in which he died. We haven't seen the police report. We haven't seen the witness statements. We haven't seen the evidence because this family are suspended in frozen animation. They haven't had their criminal trial, which we are all entitled to in these circumstances, let's not forget, even if a diplomat takes you out, or importantly, their inquest. I would love to talk to you, George, about what happened that night. I simply can't, because here we are all this time on, and we don't know. We don't know who these people are. And we're no more certain now after all this time than when we started this campaign, when we knew nothing. So there's still so many questions that are left unanswered. But George, this family live about 300 yards up the road from me. The most important thing to continue to come back to is, the totally innocent, humble, normal, ordinary family who lost their son in tragic circumstances are being denied justice, and it's doing incalculable harm and damage to both their physical and mental welfare. You couldn't script this. And the fact that it's being inflicted upon them by the United States government, the country that runs around the world preaching to others how to behave, and we are all scratching our heads. And it isn't just in this country. We get messages from millions of people around the world, and we get overwhelmed by messages. And doubtless a lot of them are your viewers and listeners, who just simply, as I say, scratch their heads at this conduct. It is unconscionable, it's unimaginable, and I once again appeal to them to bring this torture, because that's what it is, as to a swift conclusion and give this family the justice that they're entitled to.
Well, there's another thing people will be scratching their head about. Britain asked for the extradition of Anne Sekulis, and that has been refused. How can that happen? We couldn't be friendlier countries. We have asked for this woman to come back and appear in court on the charges the DPP have leveled at her. And yet at the same time, the earth is being moved in order to extradite Julian Assange in the opposite direction.
George, it's one of my great concerns at the moment that I think this country, Great Britain, has an inferiority complex when it comes to the United States. And I've been fortunate enough to spend a lot of time in Whitehall with senior leaders, imploring them to do more. And the parents, if they were on, would simply say to you, they don't know what this government is doing to get Ansakoulis back. It appears to me that there is a terrible imbalance in this relationship. And as you say, we are not enemies. These are supposedly the two greatest allies in the world. And yet, the United Kingdom at the moment appears to be unable to do anything. It doesn't appear to have any levers to pressurize the Americans to reverse this decision. And George, with your help and your colleagues in the media, I think I've got some pretty powerful levers, which is, your viewers and listeners and the millions of people around the world, because we can't believe what we're seeing. And I hope that pressure will ultimately prevail on the United States government to get them to change their mind. And as you've been talking earlier in your show, Joe Biden's coming in, and we're very, very hopeful that he'll look at this in a completely different light. But there is that imbalance in that relationship, and it needs to change.
Last question, Rad, and feel free to decline it because it's beyond your remit. But I'm struggling to accept that Ansakoulis was here as a housewife. She is an intelligence officer. In Washington, she has 100 agents working under her. I'm struggling to believe that she spent her time in England doing the school run and keeping the home fires burning. Have you any idea what she might really have been doing here?
It's a very important question, George, and I would love to be able to answer it definitively. I'm quite happy to share with you what I know, is that in conversations that I've had with people in Washington and in London, it's been strongly indicated to me that she was working here in this country deep undercover. Now, I'm led to believe that even senior politicians did not know that that was the case. Can I prove it to you? Can I show you her sort of employment papers? No, I can't. But I have reason to believe that she was actually working here. From a legal perspective, it doesn't really help us to talk about this because we can't prove it. But George, all this must come out one day. We will have an inquiry, and all this will come out, I can assure you.
God willing. Rad Saigar, thank you very much. Give our regards to poor Harry's family. And you're always welcome here on the mother of all talk shows. Who killed the Iranian scientist, Dr. Fakhrizadeh? A, Israel. B, the US. C, both. You can vote now on my Twitter feed. Some social media comments on Donald Trump. David says, Trump never started any wars. Corrupt corporate Joe will. Watch this space. Well, I'm watching the current space, David, and Trump's still in office. Omar says, I thought Trump was a punishment to the US from God. But why do the US evangelists consider him a gift from God? And Keith says, will Trump start World War III? Probably not, but you can never be sure. Israel has just assassinated a top Iranian physicist, and the stakes are getting higher. Could Trump throw his nuclear toys out of the pram before he toddles off? And Calvin says assassinating another top Iranian official is a sign that Trump is really trying to get into trouble. And Mark says, wait till Joker bin Biden takes over. It's bombs away, Biden. Perpetual wars for perpetual profits. Keep the calls and tweets coming in. 02077 982 255 is the number to call in the UK. If you're in the US, it's 001 757 744 4480. Or you can tweet us at George Galloway, at RTUK News, preferably both of us. I'll be back with the Julian Assange latest after the news with Jamie Lowe.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
England could face a third wave of coronavirus if ministers do not get the balance right with restrictions, Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab has said. He defended the move to a tiered approach when England's lockdown ends on Wednesday, saying the curbs are needed to bear down on the pandemic. MPs will vote on the system on Tuesday, with Labour undecided on its stance. The Prime Minister Boris Johnson has told MPs the restrictions will expire on February the 3rd in a bid to stop Commons rebellion. Dozens of his own MPs have indicated that they may vote against him. In a letter to all MPs and peers, Johnson said rules could be eased in December, MPs could vote again in January, and the tier system could end in February. But Labour's Shadow Foreign Secretary Lisa Nandy said her party's support was not unconditional and they were seeking clarity about the tier system. Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has defended her government's handling of the pandemic as statistics show how the country's COVID death rate is higher than in England. Official figures show there were 50.5 deaths per million in Scotland in the week up to the 15th of November, compared to 40.6 in England. The SNP leader was also asked about care home deaths after a University of Stirling report found that 47% of Scotland's COVID deaths in the first wave were in care homes, compared to 30% in England. The First Minister said it was too soon to be comparing statistics while still in the teeth of a pandemic. Douglas Ross, the leader of the Scottish Conservatives, said the SNP's record was clear for all to see, but Sturgeon's priority was, he said, dragging Scotland through another divisive referendum. The UK is in the last leg of negotiations with the EU over a post-Brexit trade deal, according to the Foreign Secretary. Dominic Raab said it was likely the talks were entering the last real major week and an agreement remained possible if the EU showed pragmatism. He added that the talks now depended on resolving a fairly narrow set of issues, including fishing rights. Face-to-face discussions resumed in London over the weekend after Chief EU negotiator Michel Barnier left self-isolation following a colleague's positive COVID-19 test last week. Raab added that a deal was subject to the EU accepting the point of principle that the UK would require control over its fishing grounds after the transition. The retail tycoon Sir Philip Green's empire could collapse within hours, as a senior source at Arcadia revealed that they do not expect any last-minute rescue deal. The company, which includes Topshop, Burton and Dorothy Perkins, is set to enter administration on Monday. That would put 13,000 jobs at risk. There had been speculation that Mike Ashley's Frasers Group was offering a £50 million loan to Arcadia, but that was dismissed by the Arcadia source. The company insider said, if this was about £50 million, we could find that in 5 minutes. Police in Argentina have searched the house and private clinic of Leopoldo Luque, the doctor of football legend Diego Maradona, who died 4 days ago. They're trying to establish if there was negligence in the treatment of the footballer, one of the greatest players of all time. The 60-year-old former star died of a heart attack at his home in Buenos Aires. Maradona's daughters are said to have demanded to know what medication their father was on. Maradona had successful surgery on a brain blood clot earlier in November and was treated for alcohol dependency. The Australian city of Sydney has reported its hottest November night on record, with the official start of summer still days away. The city recorded a minimum overnight temperature of 25.4 degrees Celsius, then hit 40 degrees C during the daytime today. Dozens of bushfires are already burning in New South Wales, with hotter weather predicted on Tuesday. A car bomb attack in Afghanistan's central province of Ghazni killed at least 40 Afghan soldiers and wounded 24 today, the public health department said. An attacker detonated an explosive-packed vehicle in front of a security base in the Deh Yak district of the province. Lewis Hamilton celebrated his 7th World Championship by winning a Bahrain Grand Prix today, but today's race is more likely to be remembered for Romain Grosjean's remarkable escape from his fireball inferno. Formula One racing driver was involved in a horrific car crash that left his car engulfed in flames at the Bahrain Grand Prix today, causing the race to be temporarily halted. On the first lap, Grosjean veered off the track after the third corner following some contact with another driver, and his car ploughed into the barriers, exploding on impact and breaking in half. The French driver miraculously emerged from the flames after several seconds and was immediately tended to by the trackside emergency services.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Now, if you are watching or listening, you'll already know of the humiliating farce where a possibly deep undercover CIA agent with 100 agents working for her, posing as a housewife and spouse, was able to claim diplomatic immunity, even though her much more professionally junior husband had no diplomatic immunity, and escaped the consequences of killing a young English boy on his bicycle by driving, we think, up the wrong side of the road. As Rad Saigar made clear earlier, actually we know almost nothing except that poor Harry never saw his 18th birthday, and that the person who says that she killed him accidentally has flown the coop and is not coming back. And neither the American government nor the British government are interested in her coming back. That must be true because although the British government has slapped an Interpol notice demanding her arrest, they were in the High Court last week defeating the family of Harry Dunn in their case that this woman never had diplomatic immunity in the first place. And the perspicacious amongst you will have already compared and contrasted the situation of Anne Sekulas with the situation of Julian Assange. Now, I have spent a decade fighting this case. It's a lonely case to fight for so many years. All the liberals and all the progressives and most of the so-called socialists could not be dragged, even screaming and kicking, into the campaign for the freedom of Julian Assange. It's a little bit better now that the full consequences of what will happen to Julian Assange for the crime of journalism, for the crime of publishing, not for killing anyone. Even his worst enemy has never claimed that he killed or caused the death of anyone. What he actually did was reveal to us the vast number of deaths, the responsibility for whom lay with the very people now trying to extradite Julian Assange. As I put it in one speech, the criminals have made it a crime to report on the crimes that they commit. It's Orwellian, isn't it? Actually, Orwell never thought of that one. Now, one of the most relentless campaigners, and one of the few in the Labour movement to campaign for Julian Assange, is Dr. Deepa Driver, who's been a guest here before. She is an academic, but also a national executive level trade unionist. And I'm glad to say she joins us now. Dr. Deepa, thank you for joining us. Before we move on to how Julian is and what the high risks are, what do you think of this paradox, contradiction between the treatment of Anne Sekulas of the CIA and Julian Assange of WikiLeaks?
George, can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, George. And it's an interesting parallel you draw out. And I think the answer is in the comments you made earlier. There is no parallel because on the one hand, you have somebody who's committed a crime, killing a young man and depriving him of his life. And on the other hand, you have a journalist and publisher, a peace-loving man who's been vilified, tortured, and whom people are now trying to murder, as we found out both in the trial and we can see in his treatment in prison, who is being punished solely for revealing the truth. And WikiLeaks is one of the few journalistic organizations that has a 100% accuracy record. So the crimes that they've revealed, whether it is traffickers' dumping of toxic waste off the Ivory Coast, whether it is corruption in various parts of the world, whether it is information that supported the Arab Spring and helped in Tunisia, whether it is information that is helping in Thailand now, or whether it is American and British war crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan. And everything that Julian has revealed has been helpful to saving people's lives, to preventing more people being massacred in illegal wars, which is what the Iraq War was. And to compare that with somebody who's killed a young child is just an atrocious comparison. And the only reason we make that comparison is because it, to my mind, draws a parallel in terms of how much of a lackey vassal state Britain has become, in that America dictates what is done. Britain is willing to compromise both its own sovereignty and the sovereignty of the nations it hosts, for example, spying on the Ecuadorian embassy, which is a sovereign embassy, and destroying everybody in order to suit the American intelligence agenda.
It is indeed degrading to Britain to look and hear the evidence. Not that many of us did look or hear because the media was elsewhere, preoccupied with the royal soap opera or Love Island or anything at all really, other than this major trial, this world historic trial going on in the heart of London, just yards away from their studios and newspaper offices. But those of us who did see it know that what you just said is not hyperbole in any way. The trial revealed, uncontested, that the United States, with Spanish intelligence operatives, not from the state in Spain, but private intelligence operatives, plotted to murder Julian Assange in London in somebody else's sovereign embassy. Am I right?
You're absolutely right, George. And the Spanish case against UC Global, which is this small intelligence firm, is just absolutely astonishing because of the information it reveals, including the fact that, a building just opposite the Ecuadorian embassy was used not just to spy on Julian Assange's legally privileged conversations, his confidential medical meetings, and all his guests, including top journalists such as Ellen Nakashima, well-known journalists who have not protested against the fact that they were spied upon. I know Germany's state broadcaster was also spied upon, and they've taken a case. But not only that, ordinary supporters, ordinary citizens were spied upon while gathering outside the embassy. And laser microphones were used to spy on Julian's conversations inside the embassy, including conversations where the consul would have been present and senior members of the Ecuadorian state would have been present. And the fact that the British state and the Metropolitan Police spent such a vast amount of money surveilling the embassy, tens of millions of pounds, shows you how complicit the British state has been in the persecution of Julian Assange. And if I may, George, I'd like to make a point about how much the British legal system has been corrupted in all of this and how it's made the British legal system, which a laughingstock worldwide, because a huge host of international legal experts, former judges, current judges, lawyers, home ministers of other countries, senior politicians, have all written to condemn the way in which the British legal system is being used. I mean, it ranges from the bizarre, which is Julian being asked to state his name and his date of birth, etc., and in order to be processed through the court system. And at the time, the judge coming out with something like, he is a narcissist. How you can work that out from somebody's name and date of birth, I don't know. Through to this case should have been thrown out. We don't really usually prosecute a case where not only has the defendant been spied upon, the people prosecuting him have tried to murder him. And there is legal evidence for this. Disgusting. It is absolutely disgusting. And then you have also the conflicts of interest of the presiding judge, Lady Emma Arbuthnot, which others might know through the Uber case. But this presiding judge, herself, her husband, her son, all have serious conflicts of interest, none of which have been correctly acknowledged. And she should have recused herself, and those judgments should have been set aside. And it is a complete travesty, the way in which the system is being corrupted, even through the case in September. I was one of two people who was allowed into the public gallery on most days. The judge who was presiding over that case, the magistrate, allowed 2 seats for the public across 2 public galleries, which had 66 seats. 3 seats in our public gallery were reserved for VIPs who never showed up. It is quite bizarre for a judge to reserve seats for VIPs. And 2 seats out of 66 shows you how much public scrutiny. Then within the court itself, the judge cut down the amount of time that the witnesses had to speak. And we had experts ranging from Noam Chomsky through to legal experts and experts on the criminal justice system in the US. None of these people were allowed to present their evidence effectively. I spoke to Andy Worthington, who's an expert on the Guantanamo detainees. And his testimony, which had been provided, he was not even allowed to give it in court. I mean, they ended up having some dodgy deal where you end up, reading an edited version of that into the record, rather than having a proper case. And most people don't know this case doesn't have a jury. It depends on the decision of this one judge.
And then there's the role of Keith Starmer, now the leader of the Labour Party. Tell us about that.
Shamefully, George, I must admit that he is my local MP, and I'm ashamed to have him both as a local MP and him and Angela Rayner leading the Labour Party. Keir Starmer was DPP at the time at which Julian was stitched up in relation to allegations in Sweden, where justice was neither done for the women nor for Julian, because Keir Starmer's CPS wrote to the Swedish authorities, and we have this in black and white through a Freedom of Information request, and it says, don't you dare get cold feet. Don't interview him in London. And Julian offered to be interviewed in Sweden if they promised not to extradite him onwards to the US. He said he would be willing to be interviewed by video, willing to be interviewed in the embassy. Thanks to British interference, the Swedes tried to close the case 2 times before they finally closed it properly. The case was left open at a preliminary investigation stage. So when people say, there were charges in Sweden, there were never any charges, not a single one. And it was never, brought to the light of day so this man could either clear his name or be punished for his crime. And it's shameful how that has pushed away the support, and you mentioned this at the start, of progressives and those on the left who are clearly, rightly disgusted by certain kinds of things. But you cannot punish somebody for a crime for which he has neither been tried, nor for a different crime that you presume he may have committed, just because you don't like what the individual revealed, which was the truth.
Now, tell us what's happening with Julian now. The Belmarsh Supermax, designed for terrorists and murderers, now has this frail, pale journalist who can scarcely stand up straight now, can scarcely be cogent in his own defense now, such as the punishment he has taken for an entire decade, which is more rather than he would have served if he had killed someone. He's been effectively isolated for 10 years. He's in poor shape. And then along comes the coronavirus, cutting a swathe through Belmarsh prison. Anybody bothered about that, Doctor?
Well, it's really disgusting, George. What is happening right now is that Julian is in lockdown 24 hours a day because there has been, as in a number of other prisons, there has been a coronavirus outbreak at Belmarsh. 55 prisoners in his wing of about 200 have been affected, including people in adjacent cells to Julian. This innocent man who is not convicted of any crime, who is a remand prisoner, is being deprived of his human rights. And essentially, they're trying... Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry. Essentially, they're trying to murder him. And they're doing this by using COVID as their excuse. And even if you are a prisoner who's accused of a horrendous crime, as some of the prisoners there will be, they are entitled to their life. There is a right. They still have human rights. And these prisoners are being endangered. All prisoners with COVID are being moved into Julian's wing. His mother and his wife are out of their mind with worry, as anybody would be if you had a member of the family who was... Imagine yourself, put yourself in his shoes, where a member of your family is immunocompromised, has a chronic lung condition, has young children, and the government are moving in other COVID-positive prisoners into his wing with a view to endangering both those prisoners and Julian, which is what is essentially happening at Belmarsh. Our strong demand as supporters is that Julian must be taken to a civilian hospital and released into the care of his family immediately. If they need to keep track of him, so be it. They can use a tag or whatever else. But this kind of attempted murder, which we can all see is happening, and for which all these people, there is a non-derogable right to life. So all these people are complicit in murder, in attempted murder in this instance. And this is what we need to resist, and the left needs to come together to condemn this. And I urge people to pay attention to Julian's trial at the final verdict on the 4th of January at the Old Bailey. It is important that we protest and demonstrate against this kind of stitch-up.
Very powerful, Dr. Deepa Driver. Thank you very much for it. Julian is blessed to have you on his side, let me tell you. Thank you very much indeed for a very powerful interview. My poll is still running. Who killed the Iranian scientist? Dr. Fakhrizadeh. A, Israel. B, the US. C, both. You can still vote on my Twitter feed. A 60-second break. Count them.
Radio Sputnik.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
The airwaves. This savannah is a rigid dichotomy of fact and fiction. As Fisher says, the Twitter sphere where the slightest misjudgment can spell being cancelled. One species rules over the airwaves through its ability to adapt and survive in even the harshest environments. The George Galloway. The top cat in these parts, it is mostly active on Sunday evenings in Britain and mid-afternoon in the United States. It seldom roars during the day. Most notable For its wide variety of headdress, it protects these parts from the mainstream media. You can catch this fine specimen on the mother of all talk shows. Don't pick a fight with it. They've been known to bite back.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
Now, here are the telephone numbers again. If you're in the UK, 02077 982 255. If you're in the US, 001 757 744 4480. Or you can tweet us at George Galloway, at RTUK News, preferably both. Jeff in Mansfield writes, George, how have you got the audacity to browbeat and rant at anyone's views regarding the pandemic? You believe it was sent by God to test us. You are a religious imbecile. I can call in if you want a go. Oh, Jeff, make my night. Make my night. Look forward to hearing from you, Jeff. Come on now. Now, this is where I look back at the 7 days in history which shaped our present and probably our future. This is the week, and a dramatic one it was. Going back just a bit, it was on this day in 1745 that Bonnie Prince Charlie's army moved from Scotland into Manchester and occupied Carlisle. The 45 rebellion didn't end well, with savage repercussions on Scotland. In 1993, Britain's Conservative government came under attack in the Commons over the revelations it had secret contacts with the IRA. 2 weeks later, Prime Minister John Major and his Irish counterpart, Albert Reynolds, signed the Downing Street Declaration. It stated that Britain had no, quote, selfish, strategic, or economic interest in Northern Ireland, unquote. It went on to say the British government would encourage agreement on a political settlement in Ireland based on the wishes of the people. An IRA ceasefire was declared in August of 1994, but it did not last. And in 1999, Northern Ireland had moved a step closer to ending 25 years of direct rule from London after the election of a Northern Ireland Assembly. The Assembly became fully operational when power was handed over from London on December the 2nd, 1999. But it was dissolved several times over the issue of weapons decommissioning. And last year too, but this time over ash for cash, the controversial subsidies for burning non-fossil fuel. Britain's most important and influential Prime Minister, the wartime leader Winston Churchill, celebrated his 80th birthday in a day of ceremonies and tributes to his remarkable career. It was the week also in 1979 when Pink Floyd's The Wall was released, selling 6 million copies in 2 weeks. 3 years later, in the same week, Thriller, the 6th studio album by Michael Jackson, was released. In one of the most important bus rides in history, in 1955, a black woman was arrested by police in Montgomery, Alabama, after refusing to give up her seat on the bus to a white person. Rosa Parks broke the segregation laws which said black Americans must vacate their seats if there are white passengers left standing. Just think about that. 1955, in my lifetime. 5 days later, thousands of black citizens boycotted the buses in Alabama to mark the day Parks was due in court. She was fined $10, the equivalent of about $70 in 2003, plus $4 in costs. Later that same evening, the young preacher, Dr. Martin Luther King, addressed a crowd of several thousand people at Holt Street Baptist Church and called for the boycott to continue. Nearly all of Montgomery's 40,000 black citizens took part in the bus boycott, which lasted for 381 days. On December 20th, the Supreme Court upheld the decision of a lower court to end segregation on Alabama's buses. However, Rosa Parks was sacked from her job and in 1957 left Montgomery for Detroit following a campaign of harassment. And in this week, in 1988, Benazir Bhutto was named as the first female prime minister of a Muslim country, Pakistan. As a matter of fact, I was there. I was working as a parliamentary observer at the election that she won. She wasn't named the first female prime minister in a Muslim country. She was elected as the first female prime minister of a Muslim country. I had been very close to Benazir Bhutto from 1983, soon after she arrived from prison in Pakistan, where she had languished following the murder of her father, the late and great Prime Minister of Pakistan, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. I became fast friends with Benazir Bhutto in 1983 and remained so until her death. I spent countless hours in her company and miss her terribly. So does Pakistan. Construction workers in 1990 drilled through the final wall of rock to join the two halves of the Channel Tunnel, linking Britain to France. I'm not sure it was altogether a great idea, says the person who wrote this. I love it, actually. The cost had ballooned to £12 billion, more than double the original estimates, and construction finished a year late in 1994. That cost, of course, is about the cost of a discredited, dysfunctional track and trace system handed out to your cronies. Now, we're having the same problems, of course, with the HS2, high-speed rail line from London to the north. McCarthyism finally came to an end in 1954, the year of my birth, when the United States Senate censured Republican Senator Joseph McCarthy for conduct unbecoming of a senator. Gosh, that conduct must have been wild. This was the beginning of the end of McCarthy's reign of terror in the United States, during which he exploited the public's fear of communism, a card that's still being played today. In 1976, Fidel Castro became officially the president of Cuba. Another of my very great friends with whom I spent countless hours. I've been lucky in my life. I wrote a book about Fidel, the Fidel Castro Handbook, and I spent time with him talking about every kind of subject under the sun, on almost all of which he was an authority. He was able to tell me the exact barrelage of oil in the North Sea. And when I protested that I had no idea to the nearest trillion what that number would be, he looked at me as if to say, "Are you sure you're a British member of Parliament?" He was the greatest man I ever met by a long distance. And to know him well was the greatest privilege. And his death anniversary, of course, was last week. on the same day as the death anniversary of George Best and the same day as the death of the late and great Diego Maradona. It was in 1977, and to no great surprise, when security police in South Africa were exonerated, nothing to see here, of any blame in the death of Black consciousness leader Steve Biko, who died while in detention. The Chief Magistrate of Pretoria said he officially accepted the findings that the 30-year-old died of extensive brain injuries sustained during a scuffle with police on the morning of the 7th of September. He was, of course, beaten to death in his prison cell. And in what was a remarkable verdict, on December the 3rd in 1965, an all-white jury in the southern U.S. state of Alabama convicted 3 Ku Klux Klansmen over the murder of white civil rights activist Viola Liuzzo. A mother of 5 from Detroit, she was shot and killed while driving a young black activist to the town of Selma following a protest march to the state capital, Montgomery, on the 25th of March. On the same day, in 1984, almost 3,000 people died from the effects of toxic gases which leaked from a chemical factory near the central Indian city of Bhopal. The accident happened in the early hours of the morning at the American-owned Union Carbide pesticide plant 3 miles from Bhopal. And finally, on December the 4th in 1991, Terry Anderson, the last and longest held U.S. hostage in Lebanon, was freed. He was reunited with his fiancée and their 6-year-old daughter, Salome, a child he had never seen before he was kidnapped 6.5 years before. As the Labour Prime Minister Harold Wilson put it, a week is a long time in politics. Let's go to the phone lines. It's the aforementioned Jeff in Mansfield. Jeff.
Hallelujah, George.
How wonderful of you to call.
Oh, no worries.
Now, let me ask you first, where and when I have ever described the coronavirus as having been sent by God to test us.
You have. I've heard you say it.
Tell me when and where.
Oh, a few weeks ago on this program.
I have never said it on this program because I have never said it.
You have?
No, I haven't.
I've heard you.
No, you haven't heard me.
I have.
You made that up, Jeff.
No, I haven't made it up at all.
No, you've made it up. I would never describe a virus which has cut down 1 million people, which has cut down 250,000 Americans, cut down 75,000 people in Britain. I would never describe that as being an act of the merciful God. So you are theologically up your own fundament.
No, I've heard you say it, George.
No, you haven't, Jeff.
No, I have.
No, you haven't.
You've said it.
No, you haven't, Jeff.
You
called me religious. Let me get the exact words. I'm a religious imbecile.
Yep.
Go on and sustain your argument on that, will you?
Well, it's obvious, isn't it?
How is it obvious, isn't it?
Well, some of the things you come out with.
Show me, quote me.
You've said it, I've heard you say it.
Or doing anything that makes me a religious imbecile.
I've heard you say it, George. You've said that.
No, I'm asking you.
You've said it.
What's your justification for describing me as a religious imbecile?
You've said that. You said he was sent by God.
So this is all based on your erroneous recollection of what I have said about the coronavirus. Is there any other evidence that I'm a religious imbecile?
Well, that's enough, isn't it?
Not if it's not true. So I'm giving you the opportunity to lead some further evidence of my religious imbecility.
Well, anyone who believes in God's an imbecile, aren't they? Well, it's obvious, isn't it?
How is it obvious, isn't it?
You think God created everything, did you?
I do believe that God created everything,
Well,
yes.
that's enough, isn't it?
That's enough, isn't it, to make me a religious imbecile?
Yeah, if you think God created everything.
Well, there's actually quite a few of us, Jeff. Quite a few of us, even in Mansfield, believe in God. But
believe He created everything. He created everything.
Sorry,
you
what
believe in Adam and Eve, do you?
Listen.
Do you believe in Adam and Eve?
Listen, I believe.
Do you believe in Adam and Eve?
No. No.
You don't?
No.
You don't believe in Noah's Ark?
No.
You might as well throw the Bible in the bin then, ain't you?
No, because they are allegories.
No.
They are stories. The Bible it was written by humans, by men, and they are allegories about important theological and historical events. They are not to be taken.
The Bible's nonsense.
They are not to be taken literally, and I don't take them literally, and therefore, your case that I'm a religious imbecile is beginning to come apart a wee bit, Jeff.
You don't believe in Adam and Eve, then?
Well, that's 5 times you've asked me, so 5 times I'll tell you. I'll tell you for the 5th time. No, I don't.
Well, that's it then.
So I'm not a religious imbecile.
Well, you're not far off, are you?
Are you withdrawing that charge?
No, you ain't.
I'm not far off. Oh, Jeff ran away. I was enjoying that. Jeff, what kind of man are you? You lost your bottle. Let's go to Jared in Pennsylvania on Iran. Go ahead, Jared.
That was certainly a comedic call. Jeff was definitely coming off as a imbecile himself, to say the least.
Yeah, and then run away. Anyway, on to more important business, Jared. Iran.
Yes. I'm really concerned that the Trump administration is escalating tensions with Iran, that it may be trying to sabotage any future talks that a Biden administration may have with Iran. And I don't know if this could be bombing Iran's nuclear facilities, which could lead to basically a regional war or maybe spiral out into, let's hope not, but World War III. I really do see this as being pushed by the Israeli and Saudi lobby, and I do think Israel was behind this, because we have evidence that before, I think it was Obama who leaked this actually, that Mossad and the Mujahideen-e-Khalq, I think, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, the Iranian terrorist group in Albania.
Yeah.
That they were behind the 2011 killings of Iranian scientists, and this is a real problem.
It's a very real problem. But let me ask you something, just in case the premise of your call is ill-founded. What reason have you got to believe that Joe Biden would want to make peace with Iran? Why, for example, have they said nothing at all about this murderous provocation on Friday?
Well, you got a good point. I mean, we haven't seen, Joe Biden in action if he is going to have peace with Iran. Obama, for example, did impose sanctions on Iran even after the JCPOA. So you are correct in that Joe Biden is sort of a loose cannon. We don't really know where he's going to blow in the wind, so to speak. I have almost no faith in Joe Biden. I think his cabinet is filled with neocons, neoliberals, identity politics,
And warmongers.
Oh yeah, warmongers up the core. And I do think that Joe Biden is going to be more hawkish than Obama. The real question is he going to compromise with the neocons that helped get him in power, or is he going to go back to the talking with Iran? And that really is the $1,000 question, so to speak. If I was Iran, I would never speak with the United States ever again.
Well, I'm not sure that they will, Jared. I was just about to make a similar point, just in case you doubted it, and you don't. The assumption that Iran is waiting for the United States to come and talk to it and be nice to it is false. This is a false assumption. The Iranians have become extremely close to both Russia and China. They have their own reach right across the Middle East, in their own country of Iran, in Iraq next door, in Syria where the Syrian government has prevailed, in Lebanon where the most important political power is closely allied with them. They have weight throughout the Muslim world, even in non-Shiite communities. Their steadfastness is widely respected, except by the most extreme sectarian zealots. Iran will not accept America just walking back into the JCPOA. There will have to be a lot of recompense before Iran will go back into that box. And it's important that people know that. They had no nuclear weapons program, as the IAEA repeatedly said, as the British government repeatedly said, the French, the German, the UN Security Council. They had no nuclear weapons program. But they might think now that actually that's the only way that they can defend themselves. Don't you think, Jared?
Yeah, or maybe have Russia or China put some nuclear weapons in Iran like they did with Cuba to protect Iran from any more
invasion,
provocative acts.
That would be a bit like all those scores of countries that America has put its nuclear weapons in.
Yeah, you got to fight fire with fire, you know.
Jared, thanks for your call. A 60-second break and then more calls.
Radio Sputnik.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
From the makers of Track and Trace comes the Boris Johnson sat-nav.
Right, next right. No, left. I mean left.
What?
Yes, no, this left. Oh, crikey, you've missed it, bugger.
Oh, bloody Tories.
Or have you? Turn round. Or, in fact, don't turn around. Carry on. Yes. You have arrived at your destination.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
Lots of comments about Jeff from Mansfield. Nathan says, George ain't no imbecile. Thanks, Nathan. And Ronnie says, this is starting to sound like a Monty Python skit. And Stephen says, Jeff is a lemon. I'm ashamed to say that I am also from Mansfield. Don't be. There's some great people in Mansfield. Quite a few of them believe in God. Ronwell says, applauds for the George versus Jeff thing. Lol. And Kelly says, throw the Bible in the bin. Ha ha ha. Jeff has no clue what an allegory is. And Kevin says, wheels have come off Jeff. And Sam says, Jeff needed to run off and take his meds. On Assange, Basma says, where are human rights? Assange's life and hundreds of thousands of prisoners and detainees are in danger. And Nikki says, George, what's happening to Nazanin Ratcliffe? I don't know that, Nikki. And George says, Dr. Deepa Driver is the most powerful pro-Julian Assange voice I have heard. Blessings to her. I agree with that, George. Truly wonderful that was. And Joshua says, go Double G. What are your thoughts on the PPE scam by the Tory cons? Well, we have talked about that many times, no doubt will again, with Moat's medic, Dr. Ranjit Brar, later in the show. Gloria says, officials announced that Netanyahu was supposed to visit the UAE and Bahrain, but got cancelled. And in response to my poll, Yusuf says, the most disgusting thing is the double standards of the Western world in not condemning this murder as state terrorism. Yusuf, can you imagine if Iran had murdered an Israeli nuclear scientist on the street in Tel Aviv? Can you even imagine where we'd be this weekend if that had happened? And Jason said, how about Iranian incompetence and failure to protect their assets? An important guy like that, no bulletproof glass even. No, his car was bulletproof, as a matter of fact. Life certainly is cheap in some places. If you read the details of the 62-man assault team that murdered the doctor, you'll find that the car was immobilized and the scientist dragged out of the car and executed. And Pete says, could it be dissidents internal to Iran? Seriously? And Natalie says, the murderers continue their disgusting bloodbath in the name of freedom and peace in the Middle East. Bethany says it was Biden and co., a distraction for their massive election fraud. And Assange, Cesar says, with this Assange, the British legal system has been revealed as totally corrupt, totally untrustful, and a total disgrace. And Jane says, Assange is a pawn and an example of what happens to all journalists if you tell the truth and show the world what's happening behind closed doors. Kevin says, we need an Assange statue to remind us of the truth tellers. And John says, it's unreal how low the UK legal system has been reduced. Joshua is in London on Iran. Good evening, Joshua.
Evening, George. Welcome back to England, because obviously you came from Scotland.
I did.
I think.
I did.
Yes, no, and that comment by the other Joshua that you read out, that was another Joshua. That wasn't me. Just in case anyone was wondering.
Okay.
Not to say I disagree with it, of course. Just saying it wasn't me. Anyway.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't think that there is going to be a war with Iran. For despite America's and Britain's, interference with them, be it in the 1953 coup that was backed by the CIA and the MI6, or their support for Iraq against Iran, I still think that Iran, so long as the Arab world has an enemy that is not Israel, as in Iran, so long as the Saudis have an adversary that is not Israel, so long as the rest of the Arab world does not have so long as they have an adversary that isn't Israel, then it's a bit of a sort of diversion. It's a distraction from the greater foe that is Israel, for both Persians and for Arabs. And for that reason, I think that all of these actions against Iran, whether it's the assassination of Soleimani or their assassination of the scientist, I think I'm not downplaying it. It's a serious, horrendous act. but it's nothing more than a divisive device in order to divert attention away from Israel, for the Saudi regime at least, because we're already beginning to suspect it's Saudi that might have had a hand in this assassination, given the supposed meeting between Benjamin Netanyahu and bin Salman. I think Iran is an asset to America in the sense that it is a diversion for the Arab world to get from Israel, just as it was for Iraq in the 1980s. And just as it is now for Saudi.
Interesting theory, Josh. And let's see if others have a view on it. Thanks for that call. Let me squeeze in Anne-Marie in Switzerland. Yes, Anne-Marie, welcome to the show.
Yes, hello. Good evening, Mr. Galloway. I'm really honored to be in your show.
Thank you.
And yes, I'm a supporter of Julian Assange, and I'm calling in because of my huge concerns about the situation. I became an activist after reading the breaking reports of News Meltzer. So I decided to travel to London in February and as well in September to join the protests during the hearings. And I must say that I'm so utterly shocked about the cruel and unhuman treatment of Julian and about the obviously total lawlessness of the whole trial, which seems to me to be a total farce. And now there is this COVID outbreak in Belmarsh prison, and Julian's life is even in much greater danger. And so my question for you is, why is he held in that part of the prison where there are all these positive cases? And do you think it's possible that they even might take advantage of this situation and let him be infected on purpose to get rid of him? I mean, are they...
Well, it's even worse, Anne-Marie, because it's not that they've got him in a wing that is infected. They are moving infected people into his wing to make the wing even more infected. So it's very difficult to disagree with Dr. Driver when she says this is attempted murder. It's very difficult to disagree with that. I suppose that the thinking is that were, God forbid, Julian to die of the coronavirus, this would save the bother of extradition. This would save the bother of trial and 145 years imprisonment at the other end of that trial in the United States. But I think that that is a serious miscalculation if that is what is being calculated. Because I believe that this is a modern-day Dreyfus affair, and that Britain will burn with shame in history forever if the life of Julian Assange is snuffed out by this sordid, shameful action that the British government has participated in. And if he ends up dead from the coronavirus, when he could have been given a tag and put into his own house as an untried, unconvicted prisoner would normally be, then I think that Britain's reputation will never really recover from that. That's my view. Last word to you, Anne-Marie.
Yeah, I just think I'm also ashamed of my country and of the other countries, the so-called democracies, which are silent and don't interfere. And I think that's also a huge disgrace.
I mean, their silence is, of course, complicity, and they stand in shame also. Thanks very much for that. So the first poll's closed. 41% of you think that Israel killed Dr. Fakhrizadeh, the Iranian nuclear scientist. 5% of you think the US did, but 54% of you think they both did. Now there's a new poll. You can get voting on it now. Should Trump pardon Assange? A, yes. B, no. C, pardon Snowden too. I'll be back after the news with Jamie Lowe.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
England could face a third wave of coronavirus if ministers do not get the balance right with restrictions, Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab has said. He defended the move to a tiered approach when England's lockdown ends on Wednesday, saying the curbs are needed to bear down on the pandemic. MPs will vote on the system on Tuesday, with Labour undecided on its stance. The Prime Minister Boris Johnson has told MPs the restrictions will expire on February the 3rd in a bid to stop Commons rebellion. Dozens of his own MPs have indicated that they may vote against him. In a letter to all MPs and peers, Johnson said rules could be eased in December. MPs could vote again in January and the tier system could end in February. But Labour's Shadow Foreign Secretary Lisa Nandy said her party's support was not unconditional and they were seeking clarity about the tier system. Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has defended her government's handling of the pandemic as statistics show how the country's COVID death rate is higher than in England. Official figures show there were 50.5 deaths per million in Scotland in the week up to the 15th of November, compared to 40.6 in England. The SNP leader was also asked about care home deaths after a University of Stirling report found that 47% of Scotland's COVID deaths in the first wave were in care homes, compared to 30% in England. The First Minister said it was too soon to be comparing statistics while still in the teeth of a pandemic. Douglas Ross, the leader of the Scottish Conservatives, said the SNP's record was clear for all to see, but Sturgeon's priority was, he said, dragging Scotland through another divisive referendum. The UK is in the last leg of negotiations with the EU over a post-Brexit trade deal, according to the Foreign Secretary. Dominic Raab said it was likely the talks were entering the last real major week and an agreement remained possible if the EU showed pragmatism. He added that the talks now depended on resolving a fairly narrow set of issues, including fishing rights. Face-to-face discussions resumed in London over the weekend after Chief EU negotiator Michel Barnier left self-isolation following a colleague's positive COVID-19 test last week. Raab added that a deal was subject to the EU accepting the point of principle that the UK would require control over its fishing grounds after the transition. The retail tycoon Sir Philip Green's empire could collapse within hours, as a senior source at Arcadie revealed that they do not expect any last-minute rescue deal. The company, which includes Topshop, Burton and Dorothy Perkins, is set to enter administration on Monday. That would put 13,000 jobs at risk. There had been speculation that Mike Ashley's Frasers Group was offering a £50 million loan to Arcadia, but that was dismissed by the Arcadia source. The company insider said, if this was about £50 million, we could find that in 5 minutes. Police in Argentina have searched the house and private clinic of Leopoldo Luque, the doctor of football legend Diego Maradona, who died 4 days ago. They're trying to establish if there was negligence in the treatment of the footballer, one of the greatest players of all time. The 60-year-old former star died of a heart attack at his home in Buenos Aires. Maradona's daughters are said to have demanded to know what medication their father was on. Maradona had successful surgery on a brain blood clot earlier in November and was treated for alcohol dependency. The Australian city of Sydney has reported its hottest November night on record, with the official start of summer still days away. The city recorded a minimum overnight temperature of 25.4 degrees Celsius, then hit 40 degrees C during the daytime today. Dozens of bushfires are already burning in New South Wales, with hotter weather predicted on Tuesday. A car bomb attack in Afghanistan's central province of Ghazni killed at least 40 Afghan soldiers and wounded 24 today, a public health department said. An attacker detonated an explosive packed vehicle in front of a security base in the Deh Yak district of the province. Lewis Hamilton celebrated his 7th World Championship by winning a Bahrain Grand Prix today, but today's race is more likely to be remembered for Romain Grosjean's remarkable escape from his fireball inferno. Formula One racing driver was involved in a horrific car crash that left his car engulfed in flames at the Bahrain Grand Prix today, causing the race to be temporarily halted. On the first lap, Grosjean veered off the track after the third corner, following some contact with another driver, and his car ploughed into the barriers, exploding on impact and breaking in half. The French driver miraculously emerged from the flames after several seconds and was immediately tended to by the trackside emergency services.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway, only on Sputnik Radio.
Now, there's the second poll on my Twitter feed at George Galloway. Should Trump pardon Assange? A, yes. B, no. C, pardon Snowden. 2. You can vote on that until the end of the show. Now, as always, there is a lot to talk about. To Moat's medic, Dr. Ranjit Brar, who throughout this pandemic all year has steered us through the difficult arguments and provided a beam of light on this subject like no other commentator, and consistently, week after week. I'm very glad to say, although busy, he joins us now. Dr. Ranjit, thank you for joining us again. I can see that you're at the front line. Tell us if we're keeping you too long. I wondered, as we approach the end of the latest lockdown, what you thought of the dog's dinner of tears that will supplant it on Tuesday. No one that I know quite knows what all that therefore means for the people in the and for the economy and for the pace of the epidemic. Give us your view in the round on that, if you would.
Thanks, George. Good to be with you once again. It's really the case, George, and I think it's becoming increasingly apparent that lockdown simply won't end. Lockdown for certain things may end in most places, so you might be able to go to the gym. Some people will be able to go to the pub. But essentially, many of the restrictions will remain in force. And what's becoming increasingly clear is that this lockdown is, as we've commented before, it is ineffective. Now, there are some signs that the numbers of cases in Britain has been suppressed by these really quite hard social measures. And they are principally social measures because it's principally the limited social space that's available in Britain which is being affected. Those schools remained open, workplaces remained open, business is increasingly agitating not to have restrictions placed upon it. The average working people are still meeting very harsh restrictions on their normal lives. So there's a limited amount of efficacy. The case numbers per week have fallen from around 35,000 at their peak to around 20,000 now. Deaths are still increasing. Hospitalizations remain high, around 14,000. And we have a large number of patients who are in the hospital with COVID and other conditions. But overall, I think if we look at the demonstrations in London, there's the tendency for people to condemn these, certainly for our press to condemn them as rabid anti-vaxxers, as die-hard village idiots, as people who are in denial of the truth. But I think what is clear to a larger and larger number of people is that the measures that our government have put in place are not only not efficacious, they are biased towards channeling large amounts of state funds towards big business and unnecessarily penalise the poorest in society and are likely to have the least amount of support for the poorest in society. And as such, there's a growing body of anger around them. And I think that really is the overwhelming sentiment of an increasing proportion of the general population as well as medical staff, George.
It looks to me like a kind of ricochet, shooting off one way then the other. We had a lockdown, too late, in my view, ended it too soon, in my view. Then we've got the state handing out unbelievable sums of money to encourage you to go to restaurants, eat out to help out, which made a lot of money for restaurants, built up a lot more debt for the government, may well have given a boost to the virus, and may actually therefore have killed people, which is presumably not the intention, but was, I think, undeniably one of the outcomes of it. Then we have another lockdown. Then we go to tiers, 1, 2, 3, 4. Then we have a 5-day Christmas amnesty, if you like, where more or less anything goes. Although it's not written down that anything goes, trust me. When you see the pictures from that 5 days, it will look like anything goes. It'll be like VE Day on the streets of Britain, in my view. There's no discernible internal logic to the course of events to me, Doctor.
Well, I think that's exactly right, George. And I think it emphasizes, it makes the irrational look rational. People who have very little confidence. I think the demonstrations were a tremendous vote of no confidence in the handling of this by the government. Either do it properly or not at all, as my grandmother used to say to me. You either have a really proper targeted measures to isolate and eradicate the virus, and it's almost too late for that because it's so endemic, it's so widespread. If 1 in 80 of the population have the virus, it's very hard to now completely eradicate it. So you're left in a position where we're all firefighting, we're all assessing our individual risk, and the majority of people will be okay, but our vulnerable will suffer, and unquestionably deaths will have been caused. Again, when the virus runs through the most vulnerable section of the population, deaths will be caused. But every aspect of the handling of the government highlights that it's not, COVID is real. COVID is unquestionably real, is unquestionably a real health crisis. But the way our government handles this crisis, as all crises, underlines the fact that they don't have the interests of the majority of people at heart. They have the interests of the City of London. This is a government of money, and it protects the interests of money, and above everything else, that is their business, that is their stock in trade. And so everything has been tailored to the interests of an elite of wealthy financiers, and that's, I think, why we see such an outpouring of hatred and anger towards Bill Gates, who is by no means the most abhorrent individual, but it's a system of billionaires and the interests of billionaires riding roughshod over the interests of the vast majority of the population, the interests of big pharma, big health companies running over the interests of the National Health Service. The fact that 42 billion is given by Boris to tests which I've finally been given this week, but they're self-tests with a 70% sensitivity, so not really hugely effective. But they're rolling these out to everyone now, whereas before there was no testing, at a huge cost of 42 billion, and that's not money going to the NHS. You could quite easily create a national pharmaceutical industry on the amount of money that's been rolled out, which would very easily be able to cope with the health demands of the population generally and this pandemic in particular, but that is precisely not their aim. And really it's high time that working people came up with a list of demands which reflected our interests, just as it's quite clear that our government has come up with a list of demands which reflect the interests of the City of London, George.
Well, I've agitated literally all of my adult life for a publicly owned pharmaceutical sector, which gets the orders from the publicly owned National Health Service. That seems to me like so not rocket science. It would have meant that we would have been buying the vaccines from ourselves. We would have been buying the medicine that we need. We'd buy it from ourselves. In other words, it would be free except for the cost of making it.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, if you think that 450 billion has been essentially given as bailouts to the largest capitalist enterprises, ostensibly under the cover of looking after the workers, because everything they say they do for the billionaires is meant to help wealth trickle down to us. But it's manifestly not the case. Wealth creation remains in the hands, big industry that makes profit remains in the hands of the wealthy, whilst the poor are suffering the most. And it's not really, the coronavirus has become a world crisis, and through the handling of this crisis, it's become a mirror that you hold up to societies, and you can tell a great deal about society, but it's not the absence or presence of COVID, which is causing these problems in the world. Really, the underlying cause is our economic system. It's the distortion of the whole of human activity to meet the financial interests of a tiny, greedy elite. And that 450 billion just gifted will now, we're being told, as we predicted it would, Rishi Sunak has quite clearly announced in his economic statement that there will be generations of increased austerity, of decreased wages, of pay restraint, of increased tax. So hitting the poorest part of the population to pay for these massive bailouts and this huge largesse, much of which has been incredibly corruptly channeled through close associates of the Tory party themselves. It's quite right that people demand some kind of a legal redress, some kind of prosecution of this level of corruption of our government. It's quite right that people demand the renationalisation of the NHS. It's quite right that people demand that really measures should be targeted to support the working people from their taxes, which they have given up. And really, sooner or later, George, there must come some kind of political force in this country which champions their need and stops our press from just labelling every dissenter, because really this emergency legislation that's been put in place has got a raft of measures which have nothing to do with fighting the coronavirus pandemic, which is real, and I do not deny, and quite clearly from our whole conversation and discourse throughout this debate, I have not denied that, you have not denied that, but, changing the rules of property deals and planning regulations got nothing to do with that. Stopping the right of people to protest has really got nothing to do with that. When they're actually reducing the restriction on business, when they're saying people can fly throughout Europe, even to areas of high coronavirus incidents on business, and this will be allowed. So it's one rule increasingly for the rich, another rule for the majority who are meeting record levels of homelessness, record levels of unemployment, record levels of child poverty. And this is something that the government is gearing up to deal with quite strongly, at the same time as really very corruptly giving away billions of what should be UK taxpayer money to their friends and associates, George.
Finally, Doctor, I've read that some of the vaccines will be rolled out this coming week. Are you seeing any signs of increased activity on that front?
I think it's highly likely. There was a meeting of chief executives and the NHS high officials, if you like, talking about just how low confidence in the general public and confidence even in NHS staff is for the vaccines, precisely because they've developed this antithesis, and they can see a difference in interest between the very wealthy and these huge pharmaceutical elites are some of the wealthiest companies on earth, and the majority of the population. And that is creating large levels of distrust at this time. So that whilst vaccine technology itself should be safe, we don't have fully published data, and yet they're rushing to push these vaccines through, just as they're criticizing Chinese and Russian vaccines relentlessly, though they seem to be the most widely given, the most safe, and the most efficacious. They're constantly promoting our own vaccines produced by massive German, American, British, Dutch pharmaceutical industry, which as yet we don't have full information on, relatively new technology, and they may well be safe and they may well be efficacious, but they haven't proven that, and they're trying to give them out on a large scale. Now, the bottom line is, as this is a measure which is likely to be effective, it's highly likely that I would advise my own relatives who are vulnerable to take it. But what they're going to do is, rather than letting health decisions be made by the NHS, this decision is being made above. It's not being rolled out by professionals who are trusted. Rather, they're talking about a PR campaign of well-known celebrities, of well-known celebrity doctors. So it's actually a media campaign. They're treating this like an election campaign. They're treating it as a public persuasion exercise. They're treating it as a PR spin exercise. And these are precisely the measures, actually, which are likely to alienate and entrench people who are wavering and slightly suspicious. So, I think vaccines have a huge role to play. I think the manner in which our vaccine procurement has happened, the amount of money we've spent, the vaccines that we're pursuing and the vaccines which we're ignoring are very revealing about the politics and the economics of our country. Ultimately, probably the vaccine will be of use to us in addressing this situation. And ultimately, I'd probably say to my father, and my mother, they should take it, George.
Dr. Ranjit, thank you very much. Most powerful discourse. Thank you indeed. Should Trump pardon Assange? Yes, 63%. No, 10%. C, pardon Snowden too, 27%. You can still vote up until the end of the show on my Twitter feed. Let's take a call from Jay in Durham. Jay, welcome.
Hi, George. Hi, thanks for taking my call. And I just wanted to let you know, I think you're a great man, and I agree with many things of what you have to say. But on this issue of lockdown, I want to know whether you would, as a member of Parliament, whether you would vote to support these latest measures, because I think the effect, the consequences on the working class and the young are going to be felt for generations to come if they go ahead and impose this lockdown. And all these things I predicted would happen in the beginning in April on my Bits for a Trump account and on Twitter, and I predicted virtually everything that would happen has happened. And I want to know whether you continue these continued lockdowns that could be going on for months and weeks and weeks.
Well, if I was a member of Parliament, I would not vote for the government. I'd give a speech like the discourse I just had with Dr. Ranjit Brar. I'd probably even nick some of his lines. I wouldn't have started from here. Would be the essential nature of what I would have to say. But no, I think these are the tiers of a clown. Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, Tier 4. I don't think that they will have the effect claimed for them. But the opportunity cost of them in terms of economic damage to the standard of living of the people, and the impact on other people's health, non-COVID sufferers' health, would mean that I could not vote for it. I'd table my own amendment and hope that I could find somebody to second it. Last word to you, Jay.
Yes. Or do you believe this has been, given what we've seen since April, do you believe this has been deliberately mismanaged by the ruling classes?
I don't know. I don't give them that level of credit, to be honest. I think that.
But do you believe that they've exploited this opportunity, for example, the tech
financially, yes, financially, in the way that Dr. Ranjit just adumbrated. Financially, yes. But I think that they have ricocheted, stumbled from one failed policy to another. Jay, got to press on because of the hour. Jamie is in Spain. Let's hear from him.
Good evening, George.
Good evening to you.
How are you?
Good.
Brilliant, all the words you're saying in support and all the actions you're doing in support of Julian Assange.
Thank you.
I'm definitely a big supporter of him.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for giving me the chance to update you on some of the actions we've made during this past week.
Please.
We've actually written our support group, which is it's the grassroots support group, and it's called wiseupaction.info. And we've got a letter, one of the letters that we sent to, firstly, Lord Buckland, the Minister of Justice, and a similar letter to Prison Governor Rob Davis. And if you don't mind, I'd like to read one of those letters. It's a sort of mix of the two letters to keep it simple. But
briefly, though, Jamie, because of the hour, please, go ahead.
Yeah, certainly. Basically, dear Lord Buckland, I refer to previous FOI, Freedom of Information replies concerning the health and security of detainees in Belmarsh Prison, in particular due to the COVID-19 and the lethal risks taken with their lives. My previous Freedom of Information requests were focused on journalist Mr. Julian Assange, but also on conditions affecting the whole prison population. It seems that state agents in the UK fail to understand their obligations under the law concerning the right to life and security. The situation is currently out of control. by the Human Rights Act 1998, European Convention Human Rights, ECHR, are incorporated into UK law. Section 6 of the Human Rights Act 1998 makes it unlawful for a public authority to act in a way that is incompatible with a person's ECHR rights. Article 2 of the ECHR, in particular, enjoins the state not to refrain from the not to refrain from the intentional and unlawful taking of life, but also to take appropriate steps to safeguard the lives of those within its jurisdiction. Recently, the Council of Europe's Committee for the Prevention of Torture and Inhuman or Degrading Treatment or Punishment published a statement of principles relating to the treatment of persons deprived of their liberty in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. It is public knowledge that those principles have been disregarded in the case of vulnerable detainees such as Mr. Assange, notably the following principles. 5. Authorities should make greater use of alternatives to pre-trial detention. 6. Special attention will be required to the specific needs of detained persons with particular regard to vulnerable groups and/or at-risk groups. Fundamental safeguard against the ill treatment of persons in the custody of law enforcement officials. Access to a lawyer, access to a doctor must be fully respected in all circumstances and at all times. If Mr. Assange's house block has indeed been afflicted with such a critical COVID-19 outbreak, evidently resulting from consistent failure to heed the above precautions, and if any of the 56 individuals die, in my view, a court would very likely find that they were killed by the state agents or with their connivance or acquiescence, making them and the UK liable for their death. Even in circumstances where the ECHR might not be able to establish beyond reasonable doubt that any state agent was involved in the killing, the court may nonetheless find the UK responsible if it considers that the authorities failed to take reasonable measures available to them to protect the detainee's right of life.
Well said, Jamie. Excellent. And I'm glad you got the chance to read that to us. Come back next week and tell us what Buckland said. Let me go to Brian in Glasgow. Thanks. Go ahead, Brian.
Hi, George. George, I was just reading the other day about the estimated, and I'm sure it's a bigger guesstimate than that, $2 trillion that the lockdown has cost. And for me, that begs the question of the cost-benefit analysis. Mm-hmm. In terms of the COVID-19 being the issue, how could we have surely tackled it, especially when recently Minister Sturgeon explaining the continued lockdown in Glasgow?
Well, some people will have seen, and all should see, the car crash interview today on Andrew Marr on BBC with Nicola Sturgeon. And Sturgeon was left with nowhere to hide. Actually, she could barely speak in reply to the devastating questions of Marr. Now, it is the case, certainly the case where I live in Scotland, but it is the case across the whole country, that about half of all deaths from coronavirus in Scotland happened in so-called care homes. And these are vulnerable people that could and should have been easily protected from the virus outside, but were instead deliberately subjected to the dangers that killed half of all of our deaths in Scotland by Scottish Government ministers, Brian.
Exactly, George. And in fact, that analysis of that response and that specific measure being thought as sensible showed those who made that had not only any grip on COVID-19, but on any kind of similar flu of a type.
Yeah, exactly.
So
if you discharge flu patients from hospital into care homes where nobody in the care home had any means, not even a mask, of protecting the people in the care home, you'd be done for manslaughter, wouldn't you?
George, even better. How can Nicola shut down everyone in Glasgow and then tell the same people she can't shut down her colleague who apparently didn't follow the guidelines? And I can't wait till you take that seat.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Brian. I won't go into that, but thank you very much indeed for that call. Let me take a 60-second break. Count them.
Radio Sputnik.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones? With the historical context to tie them together, we're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me, Jackie Lukeman, alongside my co-host Sean Blackman. By any means necessary, your guide to connecting the social, political, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
All talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
This is a very beautiful tweet from Interim President. It's about Deepa Driver's interview with me earlier about Julian Assange. That was a fantastic interview, Deepa. You have a way of expressing the gravity and depravity of Julian's situation that immediately resonates with everyone in the room. It's a gift, as is your friendship. George made an excellent decision bringing you on today. It's true, that. Let's talk to Ian in Hounslow on Harry Dunn. Go ahead, Ian.
Hello, George. I was just watching the legal rep for the Dunn family.
Yes.
Now, I can't understand why we haven't heard the results of a breathalyzer or a urine drug test for Anne Sakoulas, because it's standard practice for any fatal collision to be tested. And if she would have passed, I'm sure we would have all been told about it far and wide, which leads me to be suspicious. What about you?
I'm suspicious of the whole thing. I'm now suspicious that she was in fact driving. I'm suspicious that we have not been given access. The family of the dead boy have not been given access to any of the police reports, any of the witness statements, nothing. I'm suspicious of the whole thing, and I'm deeply suspicious. God rest Harry Dunn. I don't mean to minimize what happened to him, but if you like, I'm deeply suspicious about the bigger picture. What was Anne Sakoulas doing here? I want to know that.
Well, if you look at YouTube, when there's news reports being broadcast on YouTube, the Dunn family are continually being attacked, and it's by people or monikers, the same monikers, and I think they're US state actors or bots, and they continually defame the Dunn family and their attempts for justice. You should check it yourself, George.
I don't know if I could bear to, but I'll take your word for it, Ian. For anyone to be attacking the mother of a dead teenager, indisputably killed by reckless driving, by someone who then skipped the country, I'm not sure what kind of... I hope they're bots, because I don't know what would be the fate of any human that actually allowed themselves to be used in that way. Ian, thanks for the call. Gilbert is in New York. Go ahead, Gilbert.
Yeah, I want to ask you something about Russia, right? I'm thinking about going to stay and immigrate to Russia, maybe. And I want to know, if we go to live in Russia, do they have like such the Russian vaccine, or would they make you take the Russian vaccine for the COVID or the coronavirus?
I've got no idea about that. I'm not sure how one would immigrate to Russia. You'd be best to call in at the Russian consulate in New York, Gilbert. But I wish I could get the Russian vaccine. I've been appealing for it since it first appeared on the scene. I'd very much like to. I'd much rather have the Russian vaccine than Pfizer or AstraZeneca. Wouldn't you?
Why? Well, what's special about it? What's special about it?
I've got every reason to believe that it's more efficacious and more safe because it is a much higher level of testing. It has been rolled out to a vastly greater number of people, including the president's own daughter. And there have been zero reports of any harm done by this vaccine, and very, very high levels of efficacy, of success, of people taking the vaccine and not catching the virus.
I see. Oh, okay.
All right, Gilbert,
right,
but I'm not a spokesman for the Russians, so you better go and talk to them if you want to immigrate there. Capshaw is on the line in the Windy City in Chicago. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, good. George, it's great to hear you.
And you, sir.
I just wanted to say that I suspect that maybe the Biden's new, I don't want to say regime, but the cabinet that he's putting together is the old Obama regime.
Yeah,
and
the worst elements of it.
Yes. And so I wouldn't be surprised if they were to try to reel Iran in. I would be much more surprised though at Iran if they accepted it. That would be a shocker for me.
Yeah, I don't think that they would. Anybody who knows the Iranian culture, the nature of their state, the steadfastness of their people, would have to conclude that any idea that Joe Biden's going to arrive dressed up as Santa Claus and be immediately welcomed into hearth and home, that's entirely fanciful.
I agree.
Even if he did, by the way, Capshaw, even if he did, we've got no evidence at all that he intends to be Santa Claus. But if he did, he would not get a warm welcome at the door in Iran. They have decided on their own independent development, their independent path of development.
And which they should, and which they have a right to.
Absolute right to, and they should. Any country which can, should.
Absolutely. I agree with you, George. And I just want to say thanks, George, for actually talking about the subjects that here in America, we can't even find any mainstream news corporation even talking just a little bit about it. You don't even get it mentioned. And they won't even talk about the fact that Biden hasn't actually, here in the United States, the electoral colleges, we have a select few of people who actually do the electoral, and they have not even been given a chance to actually even decide who they're going to give the votes to.
Well, you're welcome, and please spread the word that this is a global university of the airwaves. It's entirely free, and any point of view is welcome. Appreciate your call, sir. Let's go to Brian in Bexhill, just outside London. Go ahead, Brian.
Hello, George. How are you this evening? Are you all right?
By the grace of God, I'm good. A Scotsman in Bexhill, who'd have thought it?
By the grace of God, well said, my friend. By the way, I was watching your the thing you've done with the Oxford University, and I think you stand up for human rights very, very well.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say that to you. But
Thank you.
I just wanted to put over some things, that the extreme lawlessness that's happening in London now and around the world. And about a comment you made earlier on now. People are kicking off around London and around the world about the draconian way that they're getting treated. Now, COVID-19, right? People There's certain things that aren't allowed to get talked about in media, like certain poles getting erected all over the country where, you know, I've got an EMF meter myself, and if you go around and testing it, the radiation level is 6 times higher than what is safe for human beings. So certain people might know that, certain people might not know that. I'm not saying there's no COVID, but something that they're not allowed to talk in public, you know. And Congress Bill 6666 was passed in the USA on the 1st of May 2020. The Corona Act, British Parliament, this bill was passed on the 27th of April 2020. It says that we can be forcibly removed from our home, placed in isolation and given a forced injection and our household effects taken off us. What do you think about that?
Well, I'm not sure that that has happened. If it did happen, I'd oppose it. I'm wholly against anyone being forcibly medicated, forcibly vaccinated. I'm against the treatment that the police seem to be handing out in central London yesterday. I see absolutely no need for that. It's odds with, as Dr. Ranjit said, odds with other decisions that are being made. You can go to work in an Amazon warehouse with 10,000 other people, but you can't walk down Oxford Street exercising your democratic right to protest.
I'm absolutely with you on that. Now, at the end of the day, what I've said is right. You can check it. Now, if there's high levels of radiation in the air in London, why is that not getting addressed? And why is it not getting addressed that we can be forcibly removed? Some people are saying that COVID-19 means Certificate of Vaccination ID 19, which means artificial intelligence. Cryptocurrency using body-activated data and Bitcoin is www.002020600606. And, you know...
you've lost me. You've lost me, Brian, in Bexhill. Let's go to Miles in Sussex. Too many 666s in that story. Go ahead, Miles.
Hi, George. I'm a New Zealander, been living in the UK for 20 years.
Welcome.
And I'm appalled at what's happening to Julian Assange. When I used to protest outside the Ecuadorian embassy, I used to argue with my friends that he should come out and the judiciary would give him a fair go. And that hasn't happened. And right now, in some back rooms, there's the decision's been taken for whether he will be extradited or not.
I don't know. I honestly don't know about that, so I couldn't concur with that. Certainly, all the mood music from the bench has been that the judge is going to order his deportation. Although at that point, of course, it will then be appealed and will go to rather more senior judges in whom we might want to hope for a greater understanding of not just the law, but justice. I don't know if someone has said to this judge, you must deport this man. Personally, I doubt it. But I equally don't doubt that the power doesn't imagine that there's any need for them to be so crude.
Yeah, she has a 96% extradition rate, a rubber stamper par excellence. So I don't think they
I take that point, Miles. I have nonetheless been totally shocked at the way that she has conducted the trials and the hearings. I don't understand why they have to be so crude about it. They could have opted for what might be said to be the more traditionally British approach of lavish, luxurious, rolling around in our judicial fairness and all of that, and then still found against him and deported him. I don't understand why they have to put him in a maximum security jail, how they have to strip search him, humiliate him. I don't understand why they've done that. They've made themselves look utterly sordid.
they've got away with so much for so long. They're getting lazy at it, acting with impunity, I think.
Maybe.
What I would really like is some of your audience to start tweeting to any journalist they could find on Twitter and ask that journalist what he or she has done recently to support Julian Assange. You've got 500,000 people
even
out
report the case would be a step forward, but support, yes, because this is a mortal threat to journalism, to free speech, to inquiry into the misdeeds of public authorities and so on. What kind of journalist wouldn't be on the side of Julian Assange in this case? That's a better question, isn't it?
Yeah, and they should be asked at every opportunity on Twitter and everywhere else on Facebook, and to draw a line in the sand.
Quite right, Miles. Thanks for that. Brian is in Cornwall. Go ahead, Brian.
Oh, how are you doing, George? Lord bless you, my friend.
Thank you. Everyone will be heading for Cornwall now. It's Tier 1.
We're in Tier 1, but I don't understand why we're in Tier 1, tell you the truth, George, because in the summer here, you could actually walk on the heads of the people in most of the towns here. We was inundated with millions and millions of people.
Yeah.
And we're in Tier 1. I just don't understand it. Other than that, actually being a showman as well, and seeing all the people down here and all the big theme parks open, but the councils never let the showmen open anywhere. The councils, no council in this country will let showmen open anywhere.
Have the showmen received any financial support from the government?
There's no fixed address for a business. They're travelling showmen. We've had no help whatsoever. No help whatsoever. And it's absolutely disgraceful, George. Disgraceful what this government has done to showmen.
Did the furlough scheme apply to your industry at all?
No, don't apply one bit, George, because we're not in one place. Which council do we get the furlough scheme off? Where do we get the furlough scheme?
Well, from the government, not from the council. But I could see the difficulty that you would have, and I presume that applications for bounce back loans and so on are caught up in the same traps. Yeah.
Same situation, George. But generations and generations of showmen, and it's not even through the wars. When the men went to war, the women still opened in different fairs. Even the charter fairs, which these are charter fairs, could not go ahead. And they tried to stop charter fairs. They tried to stop Appleby Fair. And that's a charter fair. And they couldn't stop it. Went to the courts, they couldn't stop it. But COVID stopped it.
Wow.
Unreal.
I'm very sorry for your troubles. But Brian, on the broader question, Cornwall must be concerned about another inundation by millions of people bringing the virus with them.
George, I live in I live in St. Million, just the other side of South Ash, across the bridge. The pub in South Ash can open, no problem. The pubs on the other side of it, well, just walk across a bridge and you're into Plymouth, and they can't open without serving a meal.
Substantial meal, yeah.
That's it. So they can't do it. Now, all the people's going to come to Cornwall. We're going to be inundated again now, right? With all the pubs and all the restaurants will be inundated with people again. It's like, it doesn't make any sense. Plymouth's only across the road from us, and they're in Tier 2. We're in a situation down in Cornwall where they're still in Cornwall, but they're in Devon. So one pub could open across the road, that one can't.
It's such a mess. Thanks, Brian, for that call. Matt is in Suffolk on the Russian vaccine. Go ahead, Matt.
Hi, George. Nice to speak to you again.
And you, sir?
Okay, I'll keep it quick because I know you've got a lot to get through.
Yeah, there's only a few minutes left now, yeah.
The Russian vaccine's been available now in Russia for, 7 weeks, 8 weeks, 9 weeks, something like that?
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and it's very efficient. It's been rolled out to loads and loads of people. Right, so this entire
the president's
epidemic,
daughter, the army,
exactly.
students, and so on.
Exactly. So it's not unsafe, is it? Unless the Russians have decided to commit genocide against their own people, which they haven't. So it's all good. Right. So this pandemic has been sold to us in the UK, and I'm just a normal working bloke. I'm a dad of 4. You know, I've got money problems, relationship problems, mental health problems, just like everybody else on the street. I'm a key worker. I've not been locked down. I've had to work harder and longer to make the same money that we were making before. Well, is this a humanitarian thing or a capitalist thing? There's been a vaccine available for 7, 8, 9 weeks. Well, where is it? If it was
they simply won't allow even any proper discussion about the Russian or Chinese vaccines.
Yeah,
it's just it's a complete no-no. You're not, don't even dream that we're going to buy these vaccines.
It's almost like, what Russian vaccine? Don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So if this has all been sold to us, that we have to make moral decisions about which family members we see and bubbles and being locked down and all the rest of it, well, it's actually nothing to do with humanity and doing the moral thing, is it? If not, the vaccine would already be here. It shouldn't be about politics.
Well, everything is about politics and about who gets the money. A major problem with both the Russian and the Chinese vaccines is that the Russian and Chinese governments were determined that people got them at cost price and that nobody made a profit out of them.
Oh dear! So they wanted to do the right thing.
Heinous, isn't it?
Instead of doing the thing that made the money, they wanted to do the right thing for the world. Well, oh dear! Aren't they the bad guys?
Exactly. I'm not allowed to swear on the air, but what a lot of bar stewards they are. Matt, thanks,
exactly.
Thanks for that call. David says on social media, George, if leaders had to fight, there would be hardly any wars. They would then correctly take the more diplomatic Churchill approach of jaw, not war. And Tony says, I still think that Trump has a great chance of flipping the results in the swing states. What are your thoughts? Don't think so, Tony. Andy says, the persecution and incarceration of Julian Assange is ominous for journalists everywhere and press freedom in general. Those who are quiet should remember Martin Niemöller's famous quote, first they came for ... Let's hear from Sam in New York. Go ahead, Sam.
Hey, George, it's good to talk to you again.
And you, sir, go ahead.
Well, I wish I was right. I was one of your first callers when you started up your show on Sputnik, where I thought Bernie had a clear path and Biden.
You and me both. You and me both, Sam. Yeah, I've taken him out of my Hall of Fame.
Well, I would say this, though, regarding the Iran thing, and I hate this because if Bernie was in the position that he would be the next president, he was very adamant about not escalating with Iran, getting into the deal.
Yes.
But where we are now. So to the point of will Biden go into the Iran deal, I mean, yes, because it was Obama's legacy. And Obama was, if many remember, was the reason Biden got the clear path because he convinced the other centrist Democrats to drop out for a cabinet position. But will Iran want to jump back into the deal? That's more of a yes and a no. Allow me to explain. So yes, because the sanctions Trump put have crippled Iran. I mean, you can't even get medicine or food. It's not an easy thing. That being said, that's not to say Biden's not going to use the sanctions that already are in play to, try to make some alterations to the deal to show that he's quote unquote more moderate or, not as liberal as Obama was. But I say no also because you have to remember when the deal was made, this was a big moment for Rouhani and the more moderates in Tehran. But once the U.S. pulls out of the deal, this only emboldens the more hardliners. You add that with the killing of the general, and then you have the killing of a scientist. They may not be too eager because the hardliners are just going to point out, hey, we already trusted them. Look what happened last time.
Well, Rouhani's term is coming rapidly to an end. He'll be replaced next year. Not by someone from the so-called, liberal or reformist wing. The next president of Iran will be a much tougher nut than Rouhani.
Yeah, and that's our own doing because you know it was.
They have. The West has humiliated the Rouhani type in the political class. They got elected saying that we can do business with the West and make everything better for everybody, and the West just kicked them in the teeth.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Even if the moderate members in Tehran wanted to try to get back to the deal, they're not going to be able to convince anyone because of how many times they're getting kicked in the teeth. But the call I wanted to point out was regarding the sanctions on Syria, because you were one of the few people who covered it. You know, the Trump team implemented what was called the Caesar sanctions, which was formed during the Obama administration. But even Obama didn't want to implement these sanctions because, you know, A, it exposed the refugee crisis, but B, more importantly, even the allies of the U.S. didn't want it, such as Jordan, because they're like, that hurts our trade and economy, et cetera, and also keeps, you know, refugees as a problem in our country. So the question regarding that is, would Biden lift that? And I would say for sure no, because, you know, you consider his cabinet pick like Tony Blinken. Am I saying that right? Blinken, whatever. This is the guy who was literally one of the founders of the, quote, arm and equip moderate rebels that you know, we all know what turned out to be.
He's got a lot of blood on his hands. Sam, just because of the hour, I need to say goodnight. But don't be a stranger. That was a terrific call. Last call, I think, of the evening is Warwick in Switzerland. Go ahead, Warwick.
Hi there, George.
Hi.
I'm just wondering, do you think this is a more of a health crisis or a political agenda crisis at the moment we're in?
Both. We're in both.
And do you think that this sort of mask mandate and these flow restrictions will ever end, or do you think it's going to be a slow grind down of humanity's almost?
No, I think that they will end if the vaccine is efficacious and if most people take it, which I'm certain that they will. I will, for a start. Then the fear of the virus will dissipate, and a life behind the mask will begin to disappear. Warwick, I need to say goodnight to you because the last call has to be the legend that is Norma in Bristol. Go ahead, Norma.
Hello, George. I just wrote down a couple of notes because I always listen to your programme. Okay. But that bloke in the beginning, Gerard, he said there's no faith in Western democracy earlier. Well, you know, the American Democrats, they cheat on their own people. And the deputy leader, Angela Rayner, she thinks she's got a right to throw out these Labour Party members. Now,
thousands and thousands and thousands.
Oh, I'm in a dilemma. You see, on the one hand, I'm just telling myself, look after your own family and friends. But then again, I say to myself, don't give up on injustices. But the last little thing I wanted to say was, one thing is important, George, is don't lose a sense of humour. Because if you lose that, you lose the game, don't you?
Exactly. You laugh or you cry. I prefer to try to find a basis for laughing at anything and everything.
Well, you've got a good sense of humour, George, and I like that.
Thank you, darling.
And I have. I think I have as well.
You certainly do. And your calls are so keenly anticipated here, Norma. Thank you. It's not Sunday if the audience doesn't hear from you. The best to you and to your husband, and the best to everyone that tuned in tonight, either on screen or through the airwaves. I hope that you've enjoyed the show. It's been marvelous for me. I hope it was for you. And if it was, then come back next week at the same time in the same place and spread the word amongst your friends that here everybody gets a hearing. Here we say things and deal with things that other people generally will not. It's a university, you see. It's not any kind of propaganda vehicle. You don't have to pass an ideology test to get a place at this university. So I hope that you will be back next week at the same time in the same place. And I hope the world is not in flames, but I rather suspect by next Sunday that it will be. Good night to you all.